Speaker, I think my honourable friend recognises the global trading ambition that this government holds. There are 1,200 staff from the Department for International Trade across 109 countries, and any business based in Swansea is equally entitled to the same sort of support that any business is based in Swindon, and I would encourage them to use the Department for International Trade.
Geraint Davis.
Yes, 44% of trade goes to the EU, but in Wales, of course, 70% of trade goes to the EU. And the CBI and producers last week in Swansea told me it's imperative we retain access to the single market and the customs union. The people of Wales didn't vote to leave those. Can he give his assurances that he'll do everything he can to keep that going so that our exports are free to continue?
I would remind the honourable member that on Monday I held an event in order to promote exports not only to Europe but to all parts of the globe. Clearly there are great opportunities, and 4,000 Welsh companies took their first steps towards exporting last year. Europe is an important market. We want frictionless trade with Europe, but we also want to look to the great opportunities that exiting the European Union will not only bring to Welsh businesses but to businesses across the whole of the United Kingdom.
There's an excessive number of rather noisy private conversations taking place. I understand the sense of anticipation, but it's very unfair on the member asking the question and the Minister answering. Let's have a decent audience for Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite Wales having some world-leading companies that contribute to humanitarian efforts in some of the poorest nations on earth, no Welsh company has been able to secure a contract with the Department for International Development. So would my right honourable friend look into this and work with the excellent Development Secretary to not only make DFID more pro-business, but more pro-Welsh business too?
My right honourable friend raises an extremely important point, and he's been not only a strong champion for Wales over many years, but also someone who has shown a strong interest in matters of overseas development. I'll happily work with him and with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Overseas Aid, in order to ensure that Welsh businesses get the same opportunity as any other UK business to win contracts in helping support and develop in those nations.
Rees.
Mr. Speaker, at its St David's Day celebration, Wales's First Minister Carwyn Jones declared that Wales is open for business. Last week he spent 4 days in America boosting post-Brexit trade between USA and Wales. Does the Secretary of State plan to visit the USA and recruit more business for Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I also welcome the Honourable Lady to the dispatch box to her first Welsh questions. Last week, the GE made the announcement in Angaro a £20 million investment for which the UK Government and the Welsh Government worked together in order to land that significant employment opportunity that will secure 1,200 jobs for more than 2 decades ahead. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, and I are working close together. He always rightly underlines that every business in Wales is entitled to the same support than any business in England, and I'm working closely with him not only on that but on trade missions as well.
Thomas Simon.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
I recently met with the unions, and following the positive outcome of the recent ballot, it is now vital that all parties work together to deliver on the agreed proposals. We will continue to engage with the sector as well as with the unions, the devolved nations and other partners as we seek to find a long-term viable solution for the industry.
Nick Thomas Simon.
The International Trade Secretary is said to have said that the government should ignore those who argue for protection. Will the Secretary of State agree to argue for a proper trade defence mechanism for steel, if that is what is required?
Well, I hope that the honourable member will look to the positive records of this government, in spite of the scaremongering by many of the members opposite. There are 41 trade defence measures already in place, and the outcomes and the results speak for themselves. Rebar has reduced into the European Union by 99%. Wire rod has also fallen by 99%. The statistics speak for themselves. This government is determined to take the right action to support free trade, but also to support Welsh and UK businesses and industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could my right honourable friend update the House on what action has been taken to ensure that Welsh steel is used in British procurement across the UK?
Yeah, here.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Significant steps have been taken since 12 months ago when the crisis broke. Energy-intensive industry support has meant that £134 million has now been paid to the steel sector. I've already mentioned there are 41 trade defence measures in place, but we've also introduced flexibility over EU emissions regulations. We are determined to ensure everything will be done to make the steel industry sustainable over the longer term.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been much discussion in the last week about the automotive industry, particularly Ford in Bridgend and the acquisition of Vauxhall by PSA, both of which have major importance to South Wales and North Wales respectively. The presence of a domestic steel industry is key to our automotive industry, so can the Minister confirm what discussions he's had with his Cabinet colleagues regarding the automotive and steel industries and what assurances he can give to both industries about the Government's commitment to their sustainability?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his question, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I are in regular communications, not only about steel but also about the automotive sector. Although Ellesmere Port is not in Wales, clearly there are a significant number of Welsh employees in the workforce. But I would also hope that the honourable member would take encouragement from the major investments such as Nissan in Sunderland. There are 100 automotive component industries based in Wales that will have access to those contracts.
Grateful to the Secretary of State. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much. Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government has confirmed its commitment to contribute £500 million to the Cardiff City deal, which will provide an investment fund for the region and support the electrification of the Valley lines. The project has the potential to broaden employment opportunities for those living in some of Wales' most deprived communities and to act as a significant incentive for business investment. The scope, planning and delivery of electrification is a matter for the Welsh Government.
But that's a pitiful answer, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't answer the question at all. The former Secretary of State for Transport, the member for West Derbyshire who's sitting there talking to the present Secretary of State for Transport, told this House in October 2012 it'd be finished by May 2015, and they haven't even started. So when will he make sure that my constituents get the proper service that they require? Clean trains, disabled access, proper toilets and a service that doesn't break down.
Well, I think the whole House enjoys the rhetoric from the Honourable Member for Honda, but it would appear that the Honourable Member for Honda...
There's far too much noise in the chamber. One cannot fail to hear the Honourable Member for Honda, but I want to hear the Minister's reply.
It would appear that the Honourable Member for Honda, Mr. Speaker, does not understand the way devolution works. The City deal has been agreed with Welsh Government, but the scope, the planning and the delivery is a matter for Welsh Government. So I'd advise the Honourable Member to speak to his colleagues in the Welsh Labour Government.
With the arrival of electrification in South Wales and the Government's investment in the new bimodal trains, which is greatly welcomed in my constituency of Gower, we need the correct infrastructure to ensure that people in South West Wales benefit, and this could be realised by the creation of a Parkway station at Swansea. Will the Right Honourable Member, my Right Honourable friend, meet with me to discuss this, please?
Well, first of all, can I congratulate my honourable member for the work that he's doing in ensuring that South West Wales also benefits from the electrification of the Great Western Main Line. I would be delighted to meet with the honourable gentleman in order to discuss the proposals for the Swansea Parkway Station, which would be a huge boost for that city as it moves towards a city deal.
Trick Grady!
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
The White Paper Securing Wales' Future was presented to the Joint Ministerial Committee on EU negotiations in late February, and we are discussing the detailed proposals with the Welsh Government.
Trick Grady!
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister realise there's a difference between discussing a paper and taking action on it? When are the devolved governments going to have any tangible action taken on their Brexit strategies? Are the devolved assemblies not going to be part of Empire 2.0? We're just going to be left with the scraps from the table?
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope the honourable member would recognise that there is a significant amount of common ground between the Welsh Government's paper and these 12 principles that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has outlined. This government is determined to deliver a deal that works for every part of the United Kingdom, and we have already said that no decisions currently taken by the devolved administrations will be removed from them, and that we will use the return of power from Europe to the United Kingdom to strengthen devolution, but also to strengthen the union of the United Kingdom.
Order. Hal Williams.
Mr. Speaker, over 5,000 EU students study in Wales, and over 1,300 EU academics teach and research, adding greatly to our national well-being. The Welsh EU White Paper is clear. Their position must be secured. Why won't his government adopt this elementary piece of economic good sense?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and others have said that we want to seek the earliest agreement to secure the status of EU nationals living in the UK and UK nationals living in the EU. It is not in our interest to undermine any one particular sector. We would like to press for an early agreement, but of course it takes two people to come to that agreement.
Hal Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, on International Women's Day, my constituent, Shiramini Satkunaranja, will be studying for her final exams in electrical engineering. She is likely to get a first in a field where there's a world shortage of qualified people, and women in particular. Had this government had its way, she would have been deported last week. How would her deportation have steadied the Chancellor's dodgy post-Brexit spreadsheet?
Well, the honourable member will know that we don't respond on individual cases, but I think that the honourable member will know the detail himself and the latest situation relating to that. But I would hope that he would also recognise that on International Women's Day that there is no other nation across the European Union that has lower unemployment for women, and that nation is Wales, and I hope that's something that the honourable member will recognise.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mrs. Cheryl Murray.
Question number one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure members across the whole House will wish to join me in marking International Women's Day as we celebrate the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women, both here and around the world. But we also redouble our efforts to tackle the problems that women all too often still face. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mrs. Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in celebrating International Women's Day. Since 2010, Conservatives in government have a proud record of protecting and supporting both those at risk and the victims of domestic violence and abuse. I saw this myself when I joined my local police, and I would like to thank them for the difficult job they do. But even as far as too many women are still at risk and are still suffering, what more can the Prime Minister do to tackle this abhorrent crime?
My honourable friend raises a very serious issue. It's one in which I have taken a particular personal interest, and I attach very great importance to this issue. Tackling domestic violence and abuse is a key priority for the government, and what we have done already in government, I think, has the potential to transform the way in which we think and tackle these terrible crimes when they take place. We've already committed to bringing forward new legislation, and today I've confirmed an additional £20 million to support organisations working to tackle domestic violence and abuse. This means the total funding available for our violence against women and girls strategy will be over £100 million this Parliament.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could I start by wishing all women a very happy International Women's Day today? And I'm very proud that the Labour Party has more women MPs than all other parties combined in this House. And a shadow cabinet of which half the members are women. A month ago, Mr. Speaker, I raised the question of the leaked texts between the leader of Surrey Council and government officials about social care. The Prime Minister's response was to accuse me of peddling alternative facts. Could the Prime Minister explain the difference between a sweetheart deal and a gentleman's agreement?
First of all, First of all, the right honourable gentleman references women in this House. I think I will point out to him that actually the Conservative Party has taken a further measure in relation to women in this House very recently. We've replaced a Labour male MP with a female Conservative. Now, if he's asked me about the issue in relation to Surrey County Council, and the substance of what he's asking is has there been a particular deal with Surrey County Council that is not available to other councils? And the answer to that is no. As I've said before, the ability to raise a social care precept of 3% is available to every council. The issue of the retention of 100% of business rates is going to be available to a number of councils in April. Now let's just look at them. Liverpool, Manchester, London. What do we know about those? They're all under Labour control. So what he's actually asking me is why should a Conservative council have access to an arrangement that's predominantly currently available to Labour councils?
Mr. Speaker, my question was about the arrangements between the government and Surrey County Council. A recording has now emerged saying that the leader of Surrey County Council, David Hodge, said there was a gentleman's agreement between him and the government which meant they would not have to go ahead with the referendum. My question is, what deal was done with Surrey County Council? Because there is an acute social care crisis that affects every council. 4.6 billion of cuts made to social care since 2010. Can the Prime Minister tell every other council in England what gentleman's agreement is available for them?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, on today of all days, I think if he could just be a little patient and wait half an hour for the budget, he'll actually find out what social care funding is available to all councils. But I come back to, if he's asking me if there was a special deal for Surrey that was not available to other councils, the answer is no. If he's looking to uncover a conspiracy, I suggest he just looks behind him.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if all the arrangements are so clear and above board, will the Prime Minister place in the library of the House a record of all one-to-one meetings that have been held between the Community Secretary and the Chancellor with any council leader or chair of social services anywhere in England? And can she explain, if there's no special deal, why Surrey is the only county council to be allowed into the business rates retention pilot when it's been denied to others?
The business rate retention pilot will be coming into force for a number of councils this April. That includes, as I've already said in answer to his earlier question, Liverpool, Greater Manchester, Greater London and some others. In 2019-20, it's going to be available to 100% of councils. For 2018-19, councils are able to apply to be part of a further pilot. That goes for all councils across the country.
The text, Mr. Speaker, said there was a memorandum of understanding. The Prime Minister said there was no deal. She now is unclear about this. Did she actually know what arrangement was made with Surrey County Council? She's unkeen on answering questions on that. There is another area of deep concern over the whole country. Could the Prime Minister tell us how many new school places will be needed by 2020?
Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman that really he should listen to the answers I give before he asks the next question. He said I didn't answer the question about a special deal for Surrey. I think I've answered it now 3 times, but I'll do it a 4th time. There was no special deal for Surrey that was not available to other councils.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was also asked a question just a moment ago about the number of new school places needed by 2020. Perhaps she could explain why we have a crisis in school places and class sizes soaring thanks to her government. So what is the answer on the number of new school places needed, Prime Minister?
Well, this government has a policy which is about increasing the number of school places, but doing more than that. I want to increase the number of good school places so that every child has an opportunity to go to a good school. That's what the money we're putting into education is about. It includes money for new free schools. Those will be faith schools, university schools, comprehensives, grammar schools, university schools, I've said, maths schools. There'll be a diversity, because what I want is a good school place for every child and parents to have a choice. What the right honourable gentleman wants is parents to take what they're given, good or bad.
Speaker, the National Audit Office tell us that a very large number of new school places are needed, 420,000. Nothing she said gets anywhere near to that. Instead, she proposes a flagship scheme to build the wrong schools in the wrong place, spending millions on vanity projects of grammar schools and free schools, whilst at the same time per pupil funding is falling in real terms. Isn't it time that this colossal waste of money was addressed? It's doing nothing to help the vast majority of children, nothing to solve the crisis of school places and soaring class sizes. That is what every parent in this country wants, not vanity projects from her government.
It's no vanity project to want every child to have a good school place. The majority of free schools that have been opened in areas where there's a need for school places, and the majority have been opened actually in areas of disadvantage where they're helping the very children we want to see get the opportunity to get on in life. But I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, this is about a fairer society. And on this budget day, what we see is we are securing the economy, Labour want to weaken it. We're working for a fairer society. Labour oppose every single reform. We're fighting for the best deal for Britain. Labour are fighting among themselves. That's Labour, weak, divided and unfit to govern this great country.
In Arawash, it is likely that, sadly, 4 people will suffer a stroke. With this in mind, and given that the current highly successful stroke strategy expires later this year, will my right honourable friend now commit her government to publish an updated strategy that also includes advances in stroke treatment, such as mechanical thrombectomy, which dramatically improves outcomes for 1 in 10 patients?
My honourable friend has raised a very important issue, and I want to assure her that the NHS does want to continue to build on the successes of the current stroke strategy. There have been huge improvements. I think we all recognise there have been huge improvements over the last decade in stroke care, and we want to deliver our ambition for truly world-leading care. On the particular treatment that she refers to, I understand the NHS has already approved the use of mechanical clot retrieval in specific cases. It does rigorously audit the quality of stroke care across the country so that we can make sure that we are delivering on our commitments. And we have some of the fastest improvements in hospital recovery rate for stroke and heart attacks in Europe.
Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On International Women's Day, we wish all campaigners for equality well, including the WASPy campaigners. Mr. Speaker, the cross-party parliamentary Brexit committee has recommended that the UK must guarantee the status of EU nationals living in the UK and act unilaterally if necessary. The committee then went on to say that the current process for consideration of permanent residency applications is not fit for purpose, and in the absence of any concrete resolution to relieve the anxiety felt by the estimated 3 million EU citizens resident in the UK, it is untenable to continue with the system as it stands. Given the massive positive contribution that European nationals make to this country, what concrete plans does the Prime Minister have to deal with this?
As the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, we do want to have an early agreement which will enable us to guarantee the status of EU citizens living in the UK, but also we need to guarantee the status of UK citizens living in the European Union. As regards the process of application that he's referred to, the Home Office is looking at this. They are looking at how they, as they always do, regularly looking at how they can improve the systems and simplify them.
Angus Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, since 2010, the Home Office has seen its full-time staff equivalent cut by 10%. So at current rates of processing applications for permanent residency, it would take the Home Office more than 50 years, 50 years to deal with 3.2 million European nationals in the UK. This is clearly, totally and utterly unacceptable. So will the Prime Minister tell us how quickly she hopes to be able to guarantee all European nationals permanent residency?
I'd say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he can't just stand up and say, because actually the Home Office is getting more efficient, it's going to be longer for answers to be given to these matters. Yes, the Home Office is getting more efficient at how it's dealing with these things. I don't know if he's ever heard about technology, but these days actually people apply online and they're dealt with online.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the recent findings of the study of terror convictions in Britain, it is clear that there are serious problems with how communities integrate into society and the danger that this lack of integration leading to acts of terror. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the government's counter-extremism strategy and response to these findings?
Well, again, this is a very serious issue that my honourable friend has raised, and the government is taking a comprehensive approach to tackling terrorism, violent extremism at source, but also, obviously, through our counter-extremism strategy, looking at extremism more widely. And we want to defeat not just terrorism and violent extremism, but extremism wherever it occurs. We will be publishing shortly a new counter-terrorism strategy, and in the coming months we will be responding to Dame Louise Case's report on integration. But this is backed up by additional investment in our security and intelligence agencies, £2.5 billion over 5 years. And I'm clear that the government is doing everything it can to tackle issues around integration, extremism and terrorism.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come from a Westminster Hall debate on behalf of my young constituent Sam, who's 11 years old, who developed narcolepsy as a result of receiving the Pandemrix vaccine to protect him from swine flu. Sam's mum is actually in the gallery today. But in these rare and devastating cases, the link between Pandemrix and narcolepsy is proven. And yet families like Di's face long legal battles with the government. Will the Prime Minister today promise that no more of these disabled children will be hounded through the courts, apologise to the families concerned, and also to oversee payments to support the children's long-term care needs?
Can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Lady on securing a Westminster Hall debate on this important topic. She refers to, at the end of her question, to the issue of payments. Of course, I'm sure she realises that the vaccine damage payment scheme isn't a compensation scheme, but it's a one-off tax-free lump sum that is paid to help ease the burden of those who are disabled as a result of vaccination, and it's part of a range of support that is provided. She's raised a very specific case. Can I suggest to her that obviously she's had that Westminster Hall debate. We want to ensure the process is open and fair at every stage. DWP does look at every claim based on its own facts, and if she wants to write with the details, I'm sure my honourable friend the Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work will look into the specific case that she's raised.
Closed question, Mr Michael Fabricant.
Question 4, sir.
Thank you. While I won't speculate on the statement that my right honourable friend the Chancellor is going to be making very shortly, I can assure my honourable friend that the fundamentals of our economy are strong, Since 2010, employment in the West Midlands has risen by 215,000, and private sector employment alone grew by 80,000 over the last year. We've also seen schools and police budgets being protected and more doctors and nurses in his local hospitals.
Michael Fabricant.
And of course, we've also witnessed the post-Brexit vote of confidence from Nissan, Boeing and Dyson investing in other parts of the country. Could my right honourable friend speak a little bit more about firms like Jaguar Land Rover in the West Midlands?
I'm happy to say to my honourable friend that, of course, in the wider sense, our plans for the Midland engine, I think, show that we want an economy that works for everyone. We've already confirmed over $330 million in the growth deal funding, money going into the Midlands Engine Investment Fund, the Birmingham Rail Hub. But it is important to recognise the investment that is being made in the UK by companies like Jaguar Land Rover, who will be building their new Range Rover model in Solihull. That's very good news for the West Midlands. It's also very good news for the British economy, and it's a sign of the confidence Jaguar Land Rover has in the UK for the future.
Gordon Marsden.
Mr. Speaker, my Blackpool casework is now full of the anxieties DWP and Home Office are imposing on vulnerable constituents, including officials' attempts to overturn tribunal decisions protecting benefits and residents. They include a family settled here for 8 years and a man with a severe brain injury. Can I ask the Prime Minister, if she wants people to respect Brexit means Brexit, shouldn't she respect that tribunals mean tribunals and not try and block them with grubby regulations affecting 164,000 disabled people?
If the honourable gentleman is referring to the decision that has been taken in relation to the courts and the personal independence payments, as I explained in this House last week, as has been explained by the Secretary of State, this is about restoring the system to the state that it was intended to be when Parliament agreed it. It was agreed by the coalition government, agreed by this Parliament, and after extensive consultation.
Mark Menzies.
Mr. Speaker, in National Apprenticeship Week, it's important to recognise this government's commitment to investment and commitment to apprenticeships and skills. Would the Prime Minister look at encouraging a greater commitment to degree apprenticeships as part of this government strategy, as championed by businesses in my constituency like BAE Systems, who have been at the forefront in developing these new programmes through its engineering degree apprenticeship scheme?
My honourable friend has raised a very important issue. As we look ahead to the future, we do want to ensure that people here in the UK have the skills that they need for the economy of the future. Degree apprenticeships will be an important part of this. And as he refers to specifically, there are companies like BAE Systems which have been right at the forefront of developing those new programmes. And I'm pleased to say that overall, if we look at apprenticeships, of course, the apprenticeship levy will take the total investment in England to £2.45 billion. That's double what was spent in 2010. That means that it's more opportunities for young people to gain the skills they need for their future.
Dan Jarvis.
Tomorrow, a memorial will be unveiled to those men and women who served our country in Afghanistan and Iraq. Does the Prime Minister agree that we should all pay tribute to their service and commemorate their sacrifice, not just with a memorial, but through a commitment to learn from the past and do better in the future?
The honourable gentleman raises a very important point. This will be a very significant ceremony when this memorial is unveiled, and we should all, I think, across this House, pay tribute to those whom that memorial will be recognising for the sacrifice that they made, those in our armed forces, but also all those civilians who also worked to deliver aid and to deliver healthcare and education. It is important that we recognise the sacrifices made by our armed forces and also by their families. And that will be a significant moment tomorrow. We're very clear that we do need to learn the lessons from the past, and that's exactly what we will do.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I was delighted with the Prime Minister's intervention in mental health in January, which I still feel has not had the attention it deserves. In Plymouth, we are completely reconfiguring our mental health services because we understand that parity of esteem means nothing without parity of provision. Will the Prime Minister come and visit us in Plymouth, come and see some of the pioneering work we are doing, perhaps in National Mental Health Week in May, where I'm hoping Plymouth will take a national lead?
I thank my honourable friend because I know this is an issue that he has championed and it's very close to his areas of concern. He's done a lot of work on mental health, and it is important as he talks about the parity of esteem which the government has introduced, and more money is going into mental health provision than ever before, and I'd certainly be delighted to see the work being done in Plymouth, provided my diary allows it.
Julie Cooper.
Thank you. In my constituency of Burnley, primary and secondary schools are severely underfunded. Maintained nursery schools are struggling to survive. Why then, at this time, when we cannot adequately fund the schools we already have, is the Prime Minister suggesting spending millions of pounds creating new grammar schools that will help only a minority of children? This is as unfair as the new funding formula and will do nothing to help social mobility.
Let's be clear about what the government has done. There are record amounts of funding going into education in this country. It was a Conservative-led government that introduced the pupil premium. It's a Conservative government that has protected the core schools budget. When it comes to new money that will be going into schools as a result of today's announcements, that money is not about a return to a binary system of grammar schools and secondary moderns. That's not what we are going to do. What we are doing is ensuring that we see a diversity of provision. So yes, some grammar schools, but comprehensives, faith schools, university schools, maths schools. What I want is a good school place for every child. What more than that, the right school place for every child.
Amanda Milling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this International Women's Day, it's absolutely fantastic. We have the highest female employment rate on record. We have the highest percentage of women on FTSE 100 boards on record. The gender pay gap is at the lowest on record. And we have an amazing female Prime Minister. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree there's still much more to do, in particular supporting women back to work after a career break. Can my right honourable friend outline what more the government are going to do to level the playing field?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. When I stood on the steps of Downing Street back in last July and talked about a country that works for everyone, I meant that. And that's why we're taking a number of measures. Including on International Women's Day today. And we are setting up a new fund to help mothers returning to work after a long career break. Now, returnships are important. They're open to both men and women, but I think we should all recognise that the majority of those who actually take time out of a career are women who are devoting themselves to motherhood for a period. Often getting back into employment is very difficult for them. They find it closed off. That's why it makes economic sense, but it's also right and fair for those women that we provide for these returnships to enable them to get back in the workplace.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone agrees that early years education is crucial for the welfare and future of our children. However, nurses in my constituency tell me that the funding for 30 hours for free childcare is not sufficient and not enough, and many of them will be forced to close. What steps will the Prime Minister take to ensure that those nurseries do not close?
Yes. Can I say to the Honourable Lady, I mean, she talks about the 30 hours that is being introduced. If you just look at what we're doing on childcare, we've introduced 15 hours free childcare a week for all 3- and 4-year-olds already. 15 hours free childcare a week for disadvantaged 2-year-olds already. And help with up to 70% of childcare costs for people on low incomes, and shared parental leave. And we'll spend a record £6 billion on childcare support by the end of this Parliament. This is this Conservative government, it's Conservatives in government that have the record of actually supporting parents in relation to childcare needs.
Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's indefensible for the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner in West Yorkshire to be raising the council tax precept when he's got £120 million in reserves and underspent this year's budget by £4 million?
Shocking! Can I say to my honourable friend, of course, as he knows, the decision on what to do about the police precept on council tax is a matter for the directly elected Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, as it is in every area that has a Police and Crime Commissioner. But I would always encourage those commissioners to look at ways of introducing efficiencies into their forces before looking to increase local taxes. I think what we've seen over the last 6 years is that police forces can find sensible savings and can reduce crime at the same time.
Geraint Davis.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, you'll know that the Royal College of Physicians have found that 40,000 people die prematurely each year from diesel pollution at a cost of £20 billion to the economy, and that YouGov have found that 45% of diesel drivers are willing to switch given the right scrappage or tax incentive schemes. So will she today commit to a fiscal strategy and a new Clean Air Act to put us on a new, cleaner, healthier trajectory rather than to take global leadership rather than be dragged into the courts to fulfil basic EU air quality standards?
As the honourable gentleman will know, we are looking at the measures that we need to introduce to improve air quality. There have been improvements in recent years, but we do need to go further, and that's what the government is looking at across departments, obviously with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs actually paying most attention to that, because that's within their remit. We will be bringing forward proposals on air quality in due course.
Victoria Atkin.
International Women's Day is a chance to reflect on how governments and democracies across the world serve women. Will my right honourable friend confirm that when it comes to female prime ministers, it's 2-0 to the Conservatives?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for having pointed that out, which I refrained from doing earlier in response to questions. But I think it is very telling that the Labour Party spend a lot of time talking about rights for women and giving support to women and getting women on, whereas it's the Conservative Party that is the party in this House that has provided 2 female prime ministers.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister give an undertaking that any new Scotland Act will only be drafted after full consultation with the people of Scotland and with the consent of the Scottish Parliament?
I just say to the honourable lady, I'm not sure whether she's referring to discussions that are currently taking place about the powers that might be available to the devolved administrations once we've left the European Union, but she knows full well that we undertake full discussions with the Scottish Government on measures that are reserved matters and on measures where we are negotiating on behalf of the whole of the United Kingdom.
Simon Hoare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crowdcoms, a business in my constituency, operates out of the small market town of Sturminster Newton. It also has offices in Seattle and in Sydney. It employs 24 people providing high-quality IT jobs, availing themselves of high-tech, fast rural broadband and mobile telephone communication. This is the answer, the recipe for growing our rural economy. Will my right honourable friend undertake to ensure that her government does all that it can to fill the black spots in our rural areas?
I can assure my honourable friend that we very much want to ensure that we're doing that. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, is looking at our digital strategy and ensuring broadband is available in rural areas and indeed at good speeds in other areas which might be less rural than my honourable friend's constituency.
Finally, Mr. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order! I don't know why members are cheering because it's finally or because of the popularity of the right honourable gentleman. But he's going to be heard. Mr. Farron.
You're also very and characteristically kind. Mr. Speaker, on International Women's Day, we stand with women and girls across the world and note with resolve that we must take not for granted the progress we've made toward equality over the last few decades. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we heard that hundreds of families of soldiers who died in Iraq and Afghanistan have been denied seats at tomorrow's unveiling of the memorial to our fallen troops. Inviting a relative of each of those killed in Iraq and Afghanistan would have taken up fewer than a third of the 2,500 seats at that event. Will she now apologise to those families for what I assume is a careless oversight and rectify that mistake immediately so that bereaved families can come and pay their respects to their fallen loved ones?
Well, can I reassure the right honourable gentleman to tell him that charities and groups representing the bereaved were asked to put forward names of attendees, and we look forward to welcoming them so that we can publicly acknowledge the sacrifice that their loved ones made on our behalf. Over half of those attending tomorrow are actually current or former members of the armed forces. No one from the bereaved community has been turned away, and everyone who's applied to attend has been successful. But I'm been reassured that if there are any bereaved families who wish to attend, then the Ministry of Defence will make every effort to ensure that they're able to do so.
Order!
Order. Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I remind honourable members that copies of the budget resolutions will be available in the vote office at the end of the Chancellor's speech. I also remind honourable members that it is not the norm to intervene on the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the Leader of the Opposition. I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Right Honourable Philip Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I report today on an economy that has continued to confound the commentators with robust growth, a labour market delivering record employment and a deficit down by over 2/3. As we start our negotiations to exit the European Union, this budget takes forward our plan to prepare Britain for a brighter future. It provides a strong and stable platform for those negotiations. It extends opportunity to all our young people. It delivers further investment in our public services, and it continues the task of getting Britain back to living within its means. We are building the foundations of a stronger, fairer, more global Britain. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as the House knows, this will be the last spring budget. The Treasury has helpfully reminded me that I am not the first Chancellor to announce the last spring budget. 24 years ago, Norman Lamont also presented what was billed then as the last spring budget. He reported on an economy that was growing faster than any other in the G7, and he committed to continued restraint in public spending. The then Prime Minister described it as the right budget at the right time from the right Chancellor. What they failed to remind me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was that 10 weeks later he was sacked. So wish me luck today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, last year the British economy grew faster than the United States, faster than Japan, faster than France. Indeed, amongst the major advanced economies, Britain's economic growth in 2016 was second only to Germany. Employment is at a record high. Unemployment is at an 11-year low, with over 2.7 million more people enjoying the security and dignity of work than in 2010, a very far cry from the 3 million unemployed predicted by the party opposite. And I'm pleased to report, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on International Women's Day that there is now a higher proportion of women in the workforce than ever before. And I'm even more pleased to report, as my honourable friend, the Prime Minister has remarked, since February the 23rd, there is a higher proportion of women in work in the Parliamentary Conservative Party. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is no room for complacency, and you will not find any on these benches. As we prepare for our future outside the EU, we cannot rest on our past achievements. We must focus relentlessly on keeping Britain at the cutting edge of the global economy. The deficit is down, but debt is still too high. Employment is up, but productivity remains stubbornly low. Too many of our young people are leaving formal education without the skills they need for today's labour market. And too many families are still feeling the squeeze, almost a decade after the crash. So our job is not done. And our task today is to take the next steps in preparing Britain for a global future, to equip our young people with the skills they need, to support our public services, and to help ordinary working families as we build an economy that works for everyone. Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Office of Budget Responsibility under Robert Choate for their report received today. And let me also take this opportunity to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, and my ministerial team, who really are the unsung heroes of the budget, doing much of the heavy lifting over the last few weeks. And, of course, my excellent PPS, my right honourable friend, the member for Salisbury. I turn now, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the OBR forecast. This is the spreadsheet bit, but bear with me because I have a reputation to defend. The OBR forecasts the level of GDP in 2021 to be broadly the same as at autumn statement. However, the path by which we get there has changed. Reflecting the recent strength in the economy, the OBR has upgraded its forecast for growth this year next year from 1.4% to 2%. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't see too many people on the opposition front bench doing this. In 2018-19, growth is forecast to slow to 1.6%, before picking up to 1.7%, then 1.9%, returning to 2% in 2021. Resilience in the economy is reflected in a strong labour market. Since 2010, the employment rate has risen from 70.2 to 74.6, with positive news for all parts of the United Kingdom. Unemployment has fallen fastest in Yorkshire and the Humber and Wales. Wages have grown fastest in Northern Ireland, and productivity has grown fastest in Scotland and in the North East. And this positive trend is set to continue over the forecast period. The number of people in employment is set to grow in every year, with a further 2/3 people in work by 2021. The OBR forecast inflation at 2.4% this year, then 2.3% next year, and 2% in 2019. And most importantly, Mr Deputy Speaker, despite higher than target inflation, real wages continue to rise in every year of the forecast. Mr Deputy Speaker, while the economic forecasts are broadly unchanged since the autumn, the OBR has substantially revised down its short-term forecast of public sector net borrowing. The OBR attributes this change to a number of one-off factors that they do not expect to lead to a structural improvement over the forecast period. Combining these factors with the higher short-term forecast for growth and taking into account the measures that I shall announce today, the OBR now forecasts borrowing in 2016-17 to be £16.4 billion lower than forecast in the autumn at £51.7 billion. Then £58.3 billion in 2017-18, 40.8 billion in 18-19, 21.4 billion, 20.6 billion, and finally 16.8 billion in 21-22, all lower than forecast at autumn statement. Overall, public sector net borrowing as a percentage of GDP is predicted to fall from 3.8% last year to 2.6% this year. And for those who care about such things, it means we are forecast to meet our 3% EU Stability and Growth Pact target this year for the first time in almost a decade. But I won't hold my breath, Mr Deputy Speaker, for my congratulatory letter from Jean-Claude Juncker. Borrowing is then forecast to be 2.9% in 17-18, and then to fall over the remainder of the Parliament to 1.9% in 2018-19, then 1% and 0.9% before reaching 0.7% of GDP in 21-22, its lowest level in 2 decades. The OBR expects cyclically adjusted public sector net borrowing to be 0.9% in 2020-2021, giving us £26 billion of headroom against the headline 2% target in our new fiscal rules, maintaining our fiscal resilience over the period. The OBR's forecast of lower near-term borrowing, coupled with recent strength in the economy, means lower debt across the period. The OBR now forecasts that debt will rise to 86.6% this year, before peaking at 88.8% next year, 1.4 percentage points lower than forecast in the autumn. It then falls in 2018-19 for the first time since 2001-2 to 88.5%, and then continues to decline to 86.9% in 1920, 83% in 2021, and then reaches 79.8% in 21-22. Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the autumn statement, I set out our plan to return the public finances to balance in the next Parliament, a plan that is now underpinned by our new fiscal rules. That plan strikes the right balance between reducing our deficit, preserving fiscal flexibility, and investing in Britain's future. Some have argued that lower borrowing this year makes a case for more unfunded spending in the future. I disagree. Britain has a debt of nearly £1.7 trillion, almost £62,000 for every household in the country. Each year, we are spending £50 billion on debt interest, more than we spend on defence and policing combined. And borrowing over the forecast period is still set to be £100 billion higher than predicted at Budget 2016. So the only responsible course of action, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is to continue with our plan, undeterred by any short-term fluctuations and undistracted by the reckless policies advanced by the opposition. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we on this side will not saddle our children with ever-increasing debt. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think honourable members opposite may need to have a word with their own front bench, which proposes borrowing another £500 billion to saddle our children and burden their futures. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the budget I set out today will again fund all additional spending decisions over the forecast period. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a strong economy needs a fair, stable and competitive tax system, creating the growth that will underpin our future prosperity. My ambition is for the UK to be the best place in the world to start and grow a business. Under the last Labour government, corporation tax was 28%. By the way, they don't call it the last Labour government for nothing. From April this year, it will fall to 19%, the lowest rate in the G20. In 2020, it will fall again to 17%, sending the clearest possible signal that Britain is open for business. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am listening to the voice of business. As I committed at the autumn statement, we've reviewed with business our R&D tax credit regime. The one place where I'm not going to hear the voice of business, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is from the benches opposite. I committed at the autumn statement to review with business our R&D tax credit regime. We have done so, and we've concluded that it is globally competitive. But to make the UK even more attractive for R&D, we have accepted industry calls for a reduction in administrative burdens around the scheme, and will shortly bring forward measures to deliver them. In a digital age, it is right that we develop a digital tax system. But in response to concerns about the timetable expressed by business organisations and by several of my right honourable friends, including the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, I have decided that for businesses with turnover below the VAT registration threshold, I will delay by 1 year the introduction of quarterly reporting at a cost to the Exchequer of £280 million. And I have heard too the calls by North Sea oil and gas producers and the Scottish Government to provide further support for the transfer of late-life assets. As UK oil and gas production declines, it is absolutely essential that we maximise exploitation of remaining reserves, and so we will publish a formal discussion paper on the options in due course. And Mr Deputy Speaker, there is one further area in which I can announce action to back British businesses. My right honourable friend, the Communities Secretary, and I have listened to the concerns raised by colleagues in this House and by businesses about the effects of the 2017 business rates revaluation. Business rates raises £25 billion a year, all of which by 2020 will be going to fund local government. So we cannot abolish them, as some have suggested. But it is certainly true in the medium term that we have to find a better way of taxing the digital part of the economy, the part that does not use bricks and mortar. But in the meantime, there is scope to reform the revaluation process, making it smoother and more frequent to avoid the dramatic increases that the present system can deliver. We will set out our preferred approach in due course and will consult on it before the next revaluation is due. The revaluation itself, Mr Deputy Speaker, is by law fiscally neutral. And ahead of this revaluation, the Government committed to a package of cuts to business rates now worth nearly £9 billion, permanently doubling the rate of small business rate relief to 100% and raising the threshold so that 600,000 small businesses are taken out of paying rates altogether. But the revaluation has undoubtedly raised some hard cases, especially for those businesses coming out of small business rates relief. So today, as I promised many of my right honourable friends I would, I address those concerns with 3 measures which apply to the national business rate system for England. First, any business coming out of small business rate relief will benefit from an additional cap. No business losing small business rate relief will see their bill increase next year by more than £50 a month. And the subsequent increases will be capped at either the transitional relief cap or £50 a month, whichever is higher. Second, recognising the valuable role that local pubs play in our communities, I will provide a £1,000 discount on business rates bills in 2017 for all pubs with a rateable value of less than £100,000. That's 90% of all pubs in England. And third, on top of these 2 measures, I will provide local authorities with a £300 million fund to deliver discretionary relief to target individual hard cases in their local areas. This fund will be allocated to local authorities by a formula, and my right honourable friend, the Communities Secretary, will set out details in due course. Taken together, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a further £435 million cut in business rates, targeted at those small businesses facing the biggest increases, protecting our pubs and giving local authorities the resource to respond flexibly to local circumstances. Mr Deputy Speaker, just as a strong economy requires a tax system that is competitive, a strong society requires one that is fair. And because I've committed to funding my spending decisions in this budget, rather than borrowing more, I make no apology for raising additional revenues and for doing so in ways which enhance the fairness of the system. First and foremost, that means collecting the taxes that are due. Since 2010, we've secured £140 billion in additional tax revenue by taking robust action to tackle avoidance, evasion and non-compliance. These actions have helped the UK achieve one of the lowest tax gaps in the world. But there is more that we can do. In this budget, we set out further actions to stop businesses from converting capital losses into trading losses, to tackle abuse of foreign pension schemes, to introduce UK VAT on roaming telecoms outside the EU in line with international standard practice, and from July we will introduce a tough new financial penalty for professionals who enable a tax avoidance arrangement that is later defeated by HMRC. Taken together, these measures will raise £820 million over the forecast period. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, as well as collecting taxes that are due, a fair system ensures that those with the broadest shoulders bear the heaviest burden. As a result of the changes we have made since 2010, the top 1% of income tax payers now pay 27% of all income tax, a higher proportion than in any year under the last Labour government. But a fair system will also ensure fairness between individuals, so that people doing similar work for similar wages and enjoying similar state benefits pay similar levels of tax. As our economy responds to the challenges of globalisation, shifts in demographics and the emergence of new technologies, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people working as self-employed or through their own companies. Indeed, many of our most highly paid professionals work through limited liability partnerships and are treated as self-employed. There are many good reasons for choosing to be self-employed or working through a company. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have done both in my time. And I will always encourage and support the entrepreneurs and the innovators who are the lifeblood of our economy. People should have choices about how they work, but those choices should not be driven primarily by differences in tax treatment. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has asked Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA, to consider the wider implications of different employment practices. And I look forward to his final report in the summer, and I'm grateful to him for sharing his preliminary thoughts. He is clear that differences in tax treatment are a key driver behind the trends we're observing, a conclusion which is shared by the IFS and the Resolution Foundation. An employee earning £32,000 will incur between him and his employer £6,170 of national insurance contributions. A self-employed person earning the equivalent amount will pay just £2,300, significantly less than half as much. Historically, the differences in NICs between those in employment and the self-employed reflected differences in state pension entitlement and contributory welfare benefits. But with the introduction of the new state pension last year, these differences have been very substantially reduced. Self-employed workers now build up the same entitlement to the state pension as employees, a big pension boost for the self-employed. The most significant remaining area of difference is in relation to parental benefits, and I can announce today that we will consult in the summer on options to address the disparities in this area, as the FSB and others have proposed. Mr Deputy Speaker, the difference in national insurance contributions is no longer justified by the difference in benefit entitlements. Such dramatically different treatment of two people earning essentially the same undermines the fairness of our tax system. Employed and self-employed alike use our public services in the same way, but they are not paying for them in the same way. The lower national insurance paid by the self-employed is forecast to cost our public finances over £5 billion this year alone. This is not fair to the 85% of workers who are employees. The abolition of Class 2 NICs for self-employed people, announced by my right honourable friend the member for Tatton in 2016 and due to take effect in 2018, would further increase the gap between employment and self-employment. To be able to support our public services in this budget and to improve the fairness of the tax system, I will act to reduce the gap to better reflect the current differences in state benefits. I have considered, Mr Deputy Speaker, the possibility of simply reversing the decision to abolish Class 2 contributions. But the Class 2 NIC is regressive and outdated. It is absolutely right that it should go. So instead, from April 2018, when the Class 2 NIC is abolished, the main rate of Class 4 NICs for the self-employed will increase by 1% to 10%, with a further 1% increase in April 2019. The combination of the abolition of Class 2 and the Class 4 increases I've announced today raises a net £145 million a year for our public services by 2021-22. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is an average of around 60p a week per self-employed person in this country. And since Class 2 contributions are payable at a flat rate, while Class 4 is chargeable as a proportion of profits, all self-employed people earning less than £16,250 will still see a reduction in their total NICS bill. This change reduces the unfairness in the NICS system and reflects more accurately the current differences in benefits available from the state. And Mr Deputy Speaker, alongside the gap between employees and the self-employed, there is a parallel unfairness in the treatment of those working through their own companies. Britain has the most competitive corporate tax regime in the G7, and we are determined to make Britain the most attractive place to start and grow a business. But to do that, we must ensure that our corporate tax regime does not encourage people across the economy to form companies simply to reduce tax liabilities, pushing the burden of financing our public services onto others. HMRC estimates that existing incorporations cost the public finances over £6 billion a year, and the OBR forecasts that at the current rate of increase, an additional annual cost to the Exchequer will occur from those choosing to incorporate of £3.5 billion a year by 2021-22. The gap in total tax and NICS between an employed worker and one who has set up his own company will normally be greater even than the gap with the self-employed. And there are several perfectly legal ways in which that gap can be made bigger still. This is not fair and it's not affordable. Fairness demands that this discrepancy in treatment is addressed, just as I've addressed the discrepancy with the self-employed. The dividend allowance has increased the tax advantage of incorporation. It allows each director shareholder to take £5,000 of dividends out of their company tax-free over and above the personal allowance. It is also an extremely generous tax break for investors with substantial share portfolios. I have decided, therefore, to address the unfairness around director shareholders' tax advantage and at the same time raise some much-needed revenue to fund the measures I shall announce today by reducing the tax-free dividend allowance from £5,000 to £2,000 with effect from April 2018. About half the people affected by this measure are director shareholders of private companies. The rest are investors in shares with holdings worth typically over £50,000 outside ISAs. And of course, everyone will benefit from the generous £4,760 increase in the annual ISA allowance to £20,000 and the further increase in the personal allowance to £11,500 from April. Mr Deputy Speaker, I now turn to duties and levies. And unusually for a Chancellor, I am delighted to announce a reduction in the expected yield of a tax, the soft drinks levy. I can confirm today the final rates of 18 and 24 pence per litre for the main and higher bands respectively. But producers are already reformulating sugar out of their drinks, which means a lower revenue forecast for this tax. This is good news for our children. And in further good news for them today, I can confirm that we will nonetheless fund DFE with the full £1 billion we originally expected from the levy this Parliament to invest in school sports and healthy living programmes. I am freezing for another year both the VED rates for hauliers and the HGV road user levy. I'm introducing a new minimum excise duty on cigarettes based on a pack price of £7.35, and I can also confirm that I will make no changes to previously planned up ratings of duties on alcohol and tobacco. The tax measures I've announced enhance the sustainability of our public services into the future, and by improving the fairness of the system, helps us to keep tax rates low. Mr. Deputy Speaker, economic policy does not exist in a vacuum, and economic growth is a means, not an end in itself. The objective of our economic policy is to support ordinary working families and to build an economy that works for them. And on this side of the House, we know that we can only achieve rising living standards and deliver investment in our vital public services if we have a strong economy and sustainable public finances. It's a simple proposition, Mr. Deputy Speaker, yet one which the opposition front bench seems to find strangely difficult to understand. We start from a strong base. Real wages have grown for 27 straight months. The wages of the lowest paid grew faster last year than in any of the previous 20 years. And the poorest households have seen their labour incomes rise more since 2010 in the UK than in any other country in the G7. Last year, we delivered a pay rise to over 1 million of the lowest paid through the National Living Wage. And next month, we take more steps to support working families with the cost of living. The National Living Wage will rise again to £7.50 in April. That's over £500 more for a full-time worker than this year, and £1,400 more than when the National Living Wage was introduced. The personal allowance will rise for the 7th year in a row to £11,500 and the higher rate threshold to £45,000. 29 million people will be better off, with a typical basic rate taxpayer paying £1,000 less than in 2010. And we will meet our manifesto commitment to increasing the thresholds to £12,500 and £50,000 respectively by the end of this Parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can also confirm today that the new NS&I bond, which I announced at autumn statement, will be available from April and will pay 2.2% on deposits up to £3,000, a welcome break for hard-pressed savers. And the universal credit taper rate will be reduced in April from 65% to 63%, cutting tax for 3 million families on low income. Next month, we will see the introduction of our flagship tax-free childcare policy. That will allow working families across the UK to receive up to £2,000 a year towards the cost of childcare for each child under 12. The scheme will be rolled out to all eligible parents by the end of the year. And from September, in addition, working parents with 3- and 4-year-olds will get their free childcare entitlement doubled to 30 hours a week. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is worth around £5,000 a year to a young family with a 3-year-old and both parents working. By the end of this Parliament, this government will be spending on childcare £6 billion a year. These childcare measures represent a further huge step forward in support for ordinary working families and for women in the workplace. And I am delighted to use the occasion of International Women's Day to announce 3 additional measures. Well, not quite announce them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has already announced 2 of them.
It's International Women's Day.
It says here, I will commit a further £20 million of government funding to support the campaign against violence against women and girls, which does, as my right honourable friend said earlier, take the government's commitment to this campaign to over £100 million in this Parliament. That is on top of the tampon tax, which today delivers another £12 million in support of women's charities across the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister earlier also mentioned that the government will commit a further £5 million to promoting returnships to the public and private sector, helping people back into employment after a career break. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as next year is the centenary of the 1918 Representation of the People Act, the decisive step in the political emancipation of women in this country, I will commit a further £5 million to projects to celebrate this centenary and to educate young people about its significance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as well as knowing the government is on their side, people want to know that they're getting a good deal from private markets too. A well-functioning market economy is the best way to deliver prosperity and security to working families, and the litany of failed attempts at state control of industry by Labour leave no one in any doubt about that, except, apparently, the right honourable gentleman opposite, who is now so far down a black hole that even Stephen Hawking has disowned him. But this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, recognises that sometimes markets, particularly in fast-developing areas of the economy, can fail people. Sometimes the market does not deliver the outcome the textbooks suggest it should. And when that happens, this government will not hesitate to intervene. We will shortly bring forward a Green Paper on protecting the interests of consumers. But ahead of the Green Paper, we will take the first steps to protect consumers from unexpected fees or unfair clauses, to simplify T's and C's, and to give consumer bodies greater enforcement powers. Together, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these measures will boost incomes, help family budgets stretch a little further, support parents back into work, and tackle some of the frustrations that sometimes make it feel that the dice are loaded against ordinary people going about their everyday lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this House knows that the only sustainable way to raise living standards is to improve our productivity growth. Simply put, higher productivity means higher pay. The stats are well known, with 35% behind Germany, 18% behind the G7 average, and the gap is not closing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, investment in training and investment in infrastructure will start to close this gap. And this government places addressing the UK's productivity challenge at the very heart of its economic plan. Because the cornerstone of an economy that works for everyone must be rising living standards for ordinary working people. A key element of our plan is the £23 billion of additional infrastructure and innovation investment that I announced at the autumn statement. Today, to enhance the UK's position as a world leader in science and innovation, I'm allocating £300 million of that fund to support the brightest and the best research talent, including support for 1,000 new PhD places and fellowships focused on STEM subjects. £270 million to keep the UK at the forefront of disruptive technologies like biotech, robotic systems and driverless vehicles, a technology I believe the party opposite knows something about. £16 million for a new 5G mobile technology hub and £200 million for local projects to leverage private sector investment in full fibre broadband networks. On transport, I'm today announcing £90 million for the North and £23 million for the Midlands from a £220 million fund that addresses pinch points on the national road network. And I'm launching a £690 million competition for local authorities across England to tackle urban congestion and get local transport networks moving again. My right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will announce details shortly. And because we believe local areas understand local productivity barriers better than central government, we make further progress with our plans to bolster the regions. In May, powerful mayors will be elected in 6 of our great cities. Across Britain, local areas will take control of their own economic destiny, and we will support them to do so. I can inform the House that I have reached a deal with the Mayor of London on further devolution, and I will follow the launch of the Northern Powerhouse strategy at autumn statement by publishing tomorrow our Midlands Energy Strategy, addressing productivity barriers across the Midlands. Midlands Engine Strategy. And for the devolved administrations, our announcements today deliver additional funding of £350 million for the Scottish Government, £200 million.
Now let's just move on. We're doing very well. Let's not spoil a good day. Come on, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Wait for it. £200 million for the Welsh Government and almost £120 million for an incoming Northern Ireland executive. Demonstrating, Mr Deputy Speaker, once again that we are stronger together in this great united kingdom. Mr Deputy Speaker, perhaps the single most important thing government can do to support ordinary working families is to invest in the future so that their children and grandchildren can make the most of the opportunities ahead. That means addressing the skills gap and ensuring that every child, regardless of background, has the opportunity to go to a good or outstanding school. At Autumn Statement, I focused on investment in infrastructure and research and development. The next step today in our plan to raise productivity and living standards is to focus on the quality of our children's education and the teaching of technical skills. And Mr Deputy Speaker, while investing in education and skills of course helps to tackle our productivity gap, delivering greater prosperity, it does something else as well. It delivers greater fairness. Because investing in skills and education is the key to inclusive growth, to an economy that works for everyone. And Mr Deputy Speaker, if you talk to people from any background in any part of the country about their hopes and their aspirations for the future, you will hear a recurring concern for the next generation. Will they have the qualifications to find a job? Will they have the skills to retrain as that job changes and changes again over a working lifetime? Will they be able to get on the housing ladder, to save for a pension? In short, the question that concerns so many people is, will our children enjoy the same opportunities that we did? And Mr Deputy Speaker, our job is to make sure that they do. And that's why we are investing in education and skills, to ensure that every young person, whatever their background and wherever they live, has the opportunity to succeed and prosper. The proportion of young people not in work or education is now the lowest since records began. That is a good base from which to build. But it is only by equipping them for the jobs of tomorrow that we ensure they will have real economic security. We've put education reform at the heart of our agenda since 2010, and that commitment is already paying off. 89% of schools in England are now rated good or outstanding, the highest proportion ever recorded. What that means, Mr Deputy Speaker, is 1.8 million more children being taught in good or outstanding schools than when the party opposite left office in 2010. Our forthcoming Schools White Paper will ask universities and private schools to sponsor new free schools. It will remove the barriers that prevent more good faith-based free schools from opening, and it will enable the creation of new selective free schools so that the most academically gifted children of every background get the specialist support they need to fulfil their potential. Today I can announce funding for a further 110 new free schools on top of the current commitment to 500. This will include new specialist maths schools to build on the clear success of Exeter Mathematics School and King's College London Maths School, which my right honourable friend the Prime Minister visited earlier this week. We commit to this programme because we understand that choice is the key to excellence in education. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, we recognise that for many parents the cost of travel can be a barrier to exercising that choice. Pupils typically travel 3 times as far to attend selective schools. So we will extend free school transport to include all children on free school meals who attend a selective school. Because we, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are resolved that talent alone should determine the opportunities a child enjoys. And before they get too excited, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we'll invest in our existing schools too, by providing an additional... Oh, yes, we will. By providing an additional £216 million over the next 3 years, taking total investment in school condition to well over £10 billion in this Parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, good schools are the bedrock of our education system. But we need to do more to support our young adults into quality jobs and help them gain world-class skills. And while we have an academic route in this country that is undeniably one of the best in the world, the truth is that we languish near the bottom of the international league tables for technical education. Our rigorous, well-recognised system of A-levels provides students with the qualifications to move into our world-class higher education system. And we support this route further today by offering maintenance loans to part-time undergraduates and doctoral loans in all subjects for the first time. But long ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, our competitors in Germany, the US and elsewhere realised that to compete in the fast-moving global economy, you have to link technical skills to jobs. And I'm pleased to report in National Apprenticeship Week that our apprenticeship route is now finally delivering that ambition here. With 2.4 million apprenticeship starts in the last Parliament, and with the launch of our apprenticeship levy in April, supporting a further 3 million apprenticeships by 2020. But there is still a lingering doubt about the parity of esteem attaching to technical education pursued through the further education route. Today, we end that doubt for good with the introduction of T-levels. Thanks to the work of Lord Sainsbury, Baroness Wolfe and other experts in this field, we have a blueprint to follow. Their review concluded that students need a much clearer system of qualifications, one that is designed and recognised by employers with clear routes into work, more time in the classroom and good quality work placements. One that replaces the 13,000 or so different qualifications with just 15 clear, career-focused routes. Delivering on those recommendations is the third part of our plan. So today, we will invest to deliver in full these game-changing reforms. We will increase by over 50% the number of hours training for 16 to 19-year-old technical students, including a high-quality 3-month work placement for every student. So when they qualify, they are genuinely work-ready. Once this programme is fully rolled out, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we will be investing an additional £500 million a year in our 16 to 19-year-olds. And to encourage and support the best of them to go on to advanced technical study, we will offer maintenance loans for those undertaking higher-level technical qualifications at the new institutes of technology and national colleges, just as we do for those attending university, putting the next generation first to safeguard their future and to secure our economy. Mr. Deputy Speaker, because changing labour markets will mean that retraining is vital, with many of our young people today needing to retrain at least once and perhaps more often during a working life that may span more than 50 years, we will consider how best to deliver high-quality learning and training throughout working lives. DFE will invest up to £40 million in pilots to test the effectiveness of different approaches to lifelong learning so that we can identify what works best and help the next generation learn and train throughout their lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just as the principle that every child should have the opportunity to fulfil his or her potential is central to this government's values, So is the principle that everyone has access to our National Health Service when they need it, and that everyone should enjoy security and dignity in old age. Today, our social care system cares for over 1 million people, and I want to pay tribute to the hundreds of thousands of carers who work in it. But the system is clearly under pressure, and this in turn puts pressure on our NHS. Today there are 500,000 more people aged over 75 than there were in 2010, and there will be 2 million more in 10 years' time. That is why the government has already delivered more than £7 billion extra spending power to the system over the next 3 years. And it's why we're ensuring that local authorities and the NHS work more closely together to enable elderly patients to be discharged when they are ready, freeing up precious NHS beds and ensuring that elderly people are receiving the appropriate care for their needs. So today, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am committing additional grant funding of £2 billion to social care in England over the next 3 years. Mr Deputy Speaker, that's £2 billion over the next 3 years, with £1 billion available in 17-18. This will allow local authorities to act now to commission new care packages and forms a bridge to the better care funding that becomes available towards the end of the Parliament. Of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not only about money. While there are many excellent examples of best practice around the country, at the other end of the scale, just 24 local authorities are responsible for over half of all delayed discharges to social care. So alongside additional funding, the Health and Community Secretaries will announce measures to identify and support authorities which are struggling and to ensure more joined-up working with the NHS. These measures and greater collaborative working under NHS sustainability and transformation plans will bring short and medium-term benefits. But the long-term challenges of sustainably funding care in older age requires a strategic approach. And the government will set out its thinking on the options for the future financing of social care in a green paper later this year. For the avoidance of doubt, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to make it clear that those options do not include, and never have included, exhuming Labour's hated death tax. The social care funding package that I have announced today will deliver immediate benefit to the NHS, allowing it to refocus on delivering the NHS England Forward View plan, a plan which this government has supported with the £10 billion increase in annual funding by 2020, £4 billion of it in this year alone. We recognise the progress that the NHS is making in developing sustainability and transformation plans. And we recognise too, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in addition to the funding already committed, some of those plans will require further capital investment. So the Treasury will work closely with the Department of Health over the summer as the STPs are progressed and prioritised. And at autumn budget, I will announce a multi-year capital programme to support implementation of approved high-quality STPs across our health service in England. In the meantime, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, expects that a small number of the strongest STPs may be ready ahead of autumn budget. And so today, I am allocating an additional £325 million of capital to allow the first selected plans to proceed. Mr Deputy Speaker, I have one further announcement related to the NHS. The social care package that I've announced today will help to free up beds by easing discharge of elderly patients. That is one of the two big pressures on our hospitals. The other is inappropriate A&E attendances by people of all ages. Experience has shown that on-site GP triage in A&E departments can have a significant and positive impact on A&E waiting times. I am therefore making a further £100 million of capital available immediately for new triage projects at English hospitals in time for next winter. Mr Deputy Speaker, this government backs the NHS's plan. We're funding it with a £10 billion above inflation increase by 2020. We've addressed the pressures on the NHS from the social care system with a total of £9.25 billion additional resources. We will protect the NHS from the effects of the changed personal injury discount rate and have set aside £5.9 billion across the forecast period to do so. And today we have made a clear new commitment to fund a capital programme for the implementation of high-quality STPs with a first down payment for the early pioneers. Mr Deputy Speaker, as the voters of Copeland so clearly understood, we are the party of the NHS. And Mr Deputy Speaker, we're the party of the NHS because we have not just the commitment and the will, but also the economic plan that will secure the future of our most important public service. Mr Deputy Speaker, last November I set out our plan to build an economy that works for everyone, to enhance our productivity and protect our living standards, to restore our public finances to balance and to invest for our future. Today's OBR report confirms the continued resilience of the British economy, and at this budget we continue with our plan, building on the foundation of our economic strength, reaching out to seize the opportunities that lie ahead, backing our public services, supporting Britain's families, investing in the skills of our young people, and making Britain the best place in the world to do business. Mr Deputy Speaker, our United Kingdom has a proud history. We have done remarkable things together, but we look forwards, not backwards, confident that our greatest achievements are ahead of us. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to invest in Britain's future, and we embark on this next chapter of our history, confident in our strengths and clear in our determination to build a stronger, fairer, better Britain. I commend this budget to the House.
Under the Standing Order number 51, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally? Formally, that's great. The question is that pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, the provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. Pensions, offshore transfers, motion number 12. Alcoholic liquor duty rates, motion number 40. Tobacco product duty rates, motion number 42. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I now call upon the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion entitled Amendment of the Law. It is on this motion that the debate will take place today. On the succeeding days, the questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of the budget debate on Tuesday the 14th of March. Minister to move. The question is that the expenditure to amend the law in respect to the national debt and the public revenue and to make further provision in connection with finance. 2. This resolution does not extend to the making of any amendment with respect to the value-added tax so as to provide A. For zero rating or exempting a supply, acquisition or importation. B. For the refunding an amount of tax. C. For any relief other than the relief that 1. So far as it is applicable to the goods, applies to goods of every description, and 2. So far as it is applicable to the services that apply to services of every description. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This was a budget of utter complacency about the state of our economy. Utter complacency about the crisis facing our public services, and complacent about the reality of daily life for millions of people in this country. Entirely out of touch with that reality of life for millions. This morning, over 1 million workers will have woken up not knowing whether they work today, tomorrow or next week. Millions more workers know their next pay packet will not be enough to make ends meet. Millions struggling to pay rent or mortgage, with private renters on average pay nearly half their income in rent. Yesterday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, over 3,000 people in this country will have queued up at food banks to feed themselves and their families. Last night, Mr. Deputy Speaker, over 4,000 people will have slept rough on the streets of this country. And the Chancellor made his boast about a strong economy. But who is reaping the rewards of this economy? For millions, it is simply not working. Not working for the NHS in its worst crisis ever, with funding being cut next year. Not working for our children's schools. Not working for our children's schools, where pupil funding continues to be cut. Not working for our neighbourhoods, which have lost 20,000 police officers, leaving the force in a perilous state in many parts of the country. And not working for our dedicated public services and the people who work in them. Nurses, firefighters, teachers, no pay rise for 7 years for them. And for people with disabilities, who are twice as likely to be living in poverty, and that this government is denying them the support that the courts say they need. 4 million children living in poverty, which will rise by another million in coming years. Not working for the thousands of young people who can't get anywhere to live, can't get on the housing ladder, and cannot, in many cases, leave the parental home. Parents of grown-up children who would expect to be debt-free by now, but having to bail out student debt or try and help with a deposit to get housing if they can manage it. And 1 million elderly people, and I'll come on to this again, denied the social care they need due to the 4.6 billion cuts made by his government with the support of the Lib Dems over the past 5 years. Not for pensioners, for whom the security of the triple lock remains in doubt. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is the reality facing Britain today. A government cutting services and living standards of the many to fund and continue to fund the tax cuts of the few. There are some people, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who are doing very well under the Conservative government. The chief executives of big companies, now paid 180 times more than the average worker and taxed less. Big corporations making higher profits and being taxed less. Speculators making more and being taxed less. And wealthiest families taxed less due to cuts in inheritance tax. All this adds up to 70 billion of tax giveaways over the next 5 years to those who need it the least. This government is a government with the wrong priorities. Let me give you 3 examples. The pain of losing a child is unimaginable for most of us. But for those who do, that pain is worsened by the stress of having to pay for their own child's funeral. I pay tribute to my friend, the member for Swansea East, for her campaign to establish a children's funeral fund. But far from establishing such a fund, costing just £10 million a year, the government is instead cutting support for bereaved families. 3 in 4 bereaved families will receive less. This is utterly heartless. Despite generous tax giveaways at the top end, there was no money either for the 160,000 people with disabilities that a court has ruled deserve a higher rate of personal independence payments. These are people with debilitating mental health conditions, dementia, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder. The Prime Minister came to office talking about fighting burning injustices. Less than 9 months later, she seems to have forgotten all about them, because none of them are being fought today. Low pay holds people back, and it's holding our country back. We're the only major developed country in which economic growth has returned, yet workers are worse off. Wages are still below the 2008 level. Inflation rising, an urgent need to address the pressure on people's incomes, massively rising personal debts, rising energy bills, and the cost of the weekly shop, transport costs and housing costs all rising. The Chancellor faced a series of tests as to whether he would stand on the same side of the people or not. He could have raised the minimum wage to the level of the living wage, the real living wage of £10 per hour, as we, the Labour Party, are pledged to do. It would pay for a pay rise for 6 million people in this country, 62% of whom are women. He failed to do that. Since 2010, millions of public sector workers have endured a pay freeze and then a pay cap. Dedicated public servants who keep our services going have lost over 9% of their real wages, or will have done by 2020. He could have ended the public sector pay cap, as we are pledged to do, and given a pay rise to 5 million dedicated public servants who we all rely on day in, day out in our hospitals, our health service in general, and our local government. He failed to do that. It's an insult to say they deserve falling living standards when we all know those in the public sector are working harder than ever, covering the jobs of those that have gone. There is a crisis too, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in job security. Millions of workers don't know whether or not they'll be working from day to day. Millions of workers who don't know how many hours they'll be working this week or next week. Just imagine what it's like to try and plan your life if you don't know what your income is going to be from one week to the other. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is the reality.
Can I just say to these benches, I want to hear the Leader of the Opposition. I don't want him shouted down, because you may not be interested, but our constituents out there want to hear what the alternative is. So please, if the whip wants to be funny, he can go and get a cup of tea now. OK, so let's just show the same respect that was given to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is nothing funny about being one of 900,000 workers on 0 hours contracts, 55% of them women. He could have announced a ban on 0 hours contract, as we are pledged to do. Again, he failed. But 0 hours contracts, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are only the tip of an iceberg. 4.5 million workers in Britain in insecure work. 2.3 million working variable shift patterns, 1.1 million on temporary contracts. We have long argued for clampdown on bogus self-employment, but today the Chancellor seems to put the burden on self-employed workers instead. There has to be something for something deal, so I hope the Chancellor will bring forward extra social security in return. One policy that Labour backs is extending statutory maternity pay to self-employed women, which is likely to cost just £10 million per year. Low pay and insecure work have consequences for us all. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in reality, we all pay for low pay. There are 1 million working households having to claim housing benefit. Just get that figure, 1 million working households claiming housing benefit because their wages aren't enough to pay the rent. And there are 3 million working families who simply rely on tax credits to make ends meet. This is modern Britain. The most effective way of boosting wages and increasing job security, as all studies show, is actually to improve collective bargaining through a trade union. Words that the Chancellor did not use in his speech. But instead of a Trade Union Act we have which will further shackle unions and perpetuate chronic low pay, which actually cost us all a lot of money through in-work benefits, we will promote collective bargaining and repeal the Trade Union Act. This is a Chancellor and a government not on the side of the workers, not on the side of the taxpayers who pick up the bill for low pay and insecure work. Mr Deputy Speaker, on International Women's Day, did the Chancellor deliver a budget that works for women? According to the House of Commons Library analysis, commissioned by my friend the member for Rotherham, who is doing a brilliant job speaking up for women from our front benches, 86% of the savings the Treasury has made from tax and benefits have fallen on women. Women's lives have been made more difficult through successive policies of this government. Women struggling with more caring responsibility due to the continuing state of emergency in social care. The waspy women born in the 1950s, who with little notice having to face a crisis in retirement they could not possibly have predicted. 54,000 women a year are forced out of their jobs through maternity discrimination. They can't afford this government's extortionate fees to take their employer to a tribunal in search of justice. Women up and down the country who will have to wait another 60 years before the gender pay gap is closed. The hundreds of women being turned away from domestic violence shelters every year through lack of space or appropriate services, or because they've simply been closed. Mothers struggling put under more pressure through cuts to universal credit and tax credits. And if this wasn't bad enough, to cut benefits to children whose only crime is to be born third or fourth in a family. Most shamefully, Mr Deputy Speaker, as of next month, women will have to prove their third child is a product of rape if they wish to qualify for a child tax credit for that child. I pay tribute to my friend the member for Rotherham and the honourable member for Glasgow Central for their campaigning on this issue. I hope the Chancellor will reverse this cut. There is, Mr Deputy Speaker, a housing crisis, a crisis of supply and of affordability. Since 2010, house building has fallen to its lowest rate in peacetime since the 1920s. The building of social homes for rent is at its lowest level for a quarter of a century. Did he empower councils to tackle the housing crisis by allowing them to borrow to build council housing, as we are pledged to do? No. Have they replaced council houses sold under right to buy, as they promised? No. Just 1 in 6 have been replaced. And was there any commitment to return to the councils the £800 million right-to-buy proceeds the Treasury has taken back, which would build 12,000 homes? No. Did he scrap the unfair bedroom tax, as we are pledged to do? No. Did he reverse housing benefit cuts that would take support away from 10,000 young people, despite the opposition of Shelter, Crisis and Centrepoint, which even the honourable member for Southgate, Enfield Southgate, correctly described as catastrophic? Last week, the Institute for Government said there were clear warning signs of the damaging impact of government's cuts on schools, prisons, health and social care. This government has taken a sledgehammer to public services in recent years. The Chancellor now expects praise for patching up the small part of that damage. The budget didn't provide the funding necessary now for the crisis in our NHS, which the BMA reckons needs an extra £10 billion. It didn't provide the funding necessary to end the state of emergency in social care now, which needs £2 billion a year just to plug the gaps, according to the King's Fund. That is not met by £2 billion over 3 years. The money is needed now. More than 1 million people, mainly elderly people, desperate for social care, still can't get it. The money ought to be made available now, because this government ducks really tough choices, like asking corporations to pay a little bit more in tax. Not every local authority can just text Nick and get the deal they want. And other council services are suffering as well. Our communities are stronger when we have good libraries, and they are valuable, obviously, for children, but for the entire community. 67 closed last year because of local government underfunding. 700 Sure Start centres closed because of lack of funding for local authorities, denying the life chances that a Labour government delivered to them with the opening of Sure Start centres in the 90s. And 600 youth centres have closed as well. These painful decisions are being taken by councils not because they want to do it, but just because they don't have enough money even to keep essential services running because of the slashing of their budgets year on year. And it goes on. It affects our communities and our lives in so many ways. Last year, councils proposed a sell-off of school playing fields, the equivalent of 500 football pitches. 500 pitches not available for young people to indulge in sport. It's our duty as a community, surely, to ensure all our young people, wherever they live, have a decent chance to grow up with a library, with a playing field, with a Sure Start centre. It's not a lot to ask. The Chancellor boasts, Mr Deputy Speaker, of a strong economy, but abandoned the targets of the previous Chancellor, so let's give a more realistic context to today's figures. The deficit that was going to be eradicated in 2015, do you all remember the long-term economic plan? The debt was going to peak at 80% of GDP and then start falling. Our economy is not prepared for Brexit. We still have an economy suffering from underinvestment and an over-reliance on consumer spending and wholly unsustainable levels of personal and household debt. Investment must be evenly spread around our country. And despite the announcements today, London continues to receive 6 times as much investment as the North East. And so that is why Labour is backing a fair funding formula for investment so that every area gets its fair share of capital spending. What's been announced today doesn't achieve that. You can't build a northern powerhouse or a Midlands engine if the investment doesn't follow the soundbite. Our country currently spends 1.7% on research and development, which is well below the OECD average. The strongest economies spend over 3%. In the immediate term, and the Chancellor didn't have much to say about this, he must focus his attentions on the precarious future of skilled workers' jobs at Vauxhall in Ellesmere Port and Luton and Ford in Bridgend. It would give export businesses more confidence if the government clearly committed to negotiating for tariff and impediment-free access to the single market and dropped this reckless threat of turning Britain into a tax haven on the shores of Europe. One of the biggest challenges facing our country, Mr Deputy Speaker, is environmental. It's climate change. This government is failing to lead, failing to drive a mission-led industrial strategy as our own Business Select Committee has recommended. The Chancellor failed to make energy efficiency a national infrastructure priority, no commitment to establishing zero carbon standards on new building, and unclear about investments in public transport that will definitely reduce pollution. The poor air quality is appalling. It's killing thousands of people in this country. It's taking away the life chances of many children growing up alongside polluted roads. The good work being done by Labour's London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, the good work being done by the Welsh Labour government has rightly recognised this as an urgent public health crisis, particularly for children. We have to deal with this crisis and deal with it urgently. There cannot be, Mr Deputy Speaker, an industrial strategy or productivity gains unless there's serious investment in skills. Adult skills training cut by 54%, further education by 14%. The small amounts committed today are long overdue but woefully insufficient. Over the coming years, the school's budget is being cut by 8%. Does the Chancellor really want fewer teachers and teaching assistants, larger classes, shorter school days? Which is it? I agree with the Prime Minister that every child deserves a decent education. Every community deserves decent schools. You do it by working with those communities to provide those schools, not plonking into them selective schools which are not being demanded by those communities. The money announced by the Prime Minister yesterday for new grammar schools is frankly a vanity project. Cancel this gimmick. Reject selection and segregation, and why not honour their own 2015 manifesto pledge to protect per-pupil funding, which is clearly not happening. This is a budget that lacks ambition for this country and lacks fairness. It demonstrates again the appalling priorities of this government. Another year, tax breaks for the few, public service cuts for the many. When she took office, the Prime Minister said, if you're one of those families, if you're just managing, I want to address you directly. This budget does not address them. It failed them. This budget has done nothing to tackle low pay, nothing to solve the state of emergency that persists for so many people demanding and needing health and social care now, and nothing to make a fair economy that truly works for everyone. It's built on unfairness, and it's built on failure to tackle unfairness in our society.
Andrew Tyree.
Well, I don't think there was a great deal of concord in the House about that speech, but I do think there is some agreement across the House about a number of the things that the Chancellor said. In fact, I think there's been a quiet consensus in this place for steady deficit reduction ever since Alistair Darling's budget of 2010. And I'm delighted that the Chancellor is persisting with those reductions. Before picking up on a few measures, particularly those that affect small businesses, I'd just like to make one point about fiscal policy overall. This is that the Chancellor doesn't have very much room for manoeuvre, actually. He's pretty heavily boxed in. I see him nodding in agreement. On the spending side, 3/4 of public spending is covered by manifesto pledges, and so every round of savings has to fall on a progressively smaller area, which makes it very painful for it to absorb. And on the tax side, he's just as constrained, in fact, I would say even more, because he's inherited the tax lock. That's the statutory prohibition on on any alteration to a number of taxes, reduction in number of taxes, or increase in the number of taxes, and a commitment to reduce corporation tax to 15%. That puts over 80% of revenue beyond his reach, should he need to raise more money later. And of course there's the fuel duty freeze. I think it is effectively a freeze, which was announced in the autumn statement. All those tax and spend pledges, of course, are the fallout of an electoral bidding war. Dealing with that is a matter for another day. I'll just first of all pick up on a few detailed measures we just heard something about, particularly as they affect small businesses. And I'm particularly concerned about small businesses. I'm delighted to hear that there was some good news for them. But it's just worth going through the list of things they're having to deal with at the moment. There's the doubling of insurance premium tax, that was announced last year. There's automatic enrolment for pensions. There's the extra cost of the living wage. There's the infrastructure levy. There's revaluation of the rates. Well, I'll come on to the proposals that have just been announced in a moment. And then there's making tax digital, plus the proposals on NICs, which we've just, Class 4 NICs, which we've just had announced. But let's turn to what I will give way.
I'm very grateful to this gentleman, and he's giving a very good analysis so far. But on the point about the increase in national insurance contributions for the self-employed, doesn't he think that the Chancellor needs to explain why he's breaking the manifesto promise made in the 2015 general election manifesto on that?
Set out his reasons quite carefully, that he thinks that there's a strong argument for matching what people get out of NICs, the contribution side, to the receipt side, to the contribution side. I'll look carefully at the point he's made on the specific manifesto pledge, and no doubt when he comes before us we'll have a further exchange on it. I want to just say a few words about making tax digital. He's announced some quite important changes there. Until we need to be clear what the problem is that he's seeking to address with what he's announced. Until this statement today, from 2018, several million people, most of them small traders, would have been required by law for the first time to fill in their tax returns electronically. Some of those traders won't even have a smartphone, let alone a computer. I think the effects of those plans would have been to impose a massive and unfair burden on small businesses. So it's very good news, and some of the very smallest traders. So it's very good news that the Chancellor has made a concession today, and it appears to be aligned with at least one of the suggestions made in a report by the Treasury Committee on this. The most important thing he's doing is raising the starting threshold, or keeping the starting threshold for another year at the VAT threshold. That's £83,000. Now that's the good news, but the not so good news is it looks like it's only relief for a year. Could I ask the Chancellor to consider phasing in the lower threshold? He has suggested a lower threshold of 10,000, which seems extremely low to me. Indirectly, he's looking puzzled, but he'll find that that's what HMRC have been talking about. And phasing it in over a run of 3 or 4 years, dropping it dramatically from 83 or whatever the VAT threshold becomes, does in 1 year does strike me as unreasonable. I will in a moment, when I've completed what I want to say on making tax digital, and there are several colleagues who want to come in. I quite understand, of course, why the Chancellor is doing this. I'm sure HMRC have told him that there's a huge amount of money sitting waiting to be collected, and he needs the money, and he's nodding his head in agreement to that too. Actually, I think I'm right in saying they've previously suggested there's £2 billion of uncollected tax available. Well, I doubt that, and so does the Treasury Committee. In fact, if the Chancellor is brutal about his introduction of this, he might not get very much money. Some businesses will go into the grey economy, and some will cease trading altogether. So the pot of gold might not be there at all. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman who's also on the Treasury Committee.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I agree with him that merely delaying by a year is insufficient. Does he agree the Chancellor ought to look at the other recommendations made by the Treasury Committee, and that unless he does, as a whole package of measures, today's budget will have been good news for accountants and bad news for small businesses?
Well, he's made a powerful point, and of course I support his support for the proposals that we together worked up on making tax digital, and I will continue to make those points as vigorously as I can on behalf of the committee, and I'm sure the Chancellor's listening now. But what we should do is welcome the news we have had, which is that there's an acknowledgement that the pre-existing proposals weren't workable in that form, and we've already had a bit of adjustment. Now the door's ajar, maybe we could have another conversation through the gap.
My honourable friend for giving way, and can I, like him, welcome the easing for businesses below the VAT threshold, but would he still recognise with me that for those over the VAT threshold, not necessarily enormous businesses, but who are struggling with some of the additional burdens that he mentioned, not least auto-enrolment, some of them dealing with business rates, the changes to dividend taxation, particularly for owner-managers of business, and Mr Deputy Speaker, I declare an interest as one of those people that struggling to accommodate the new system within the next basically 12 months will be a challenge and will have a significant compliance cost for those businesses.
Well, my honourable friend, who's also on the Treasury Committee, is making the point that even people which are in quite modest but all the same slightly larger businesses are also going to find the bureaucratic burden of the introduction of the making tax digital proposals pretty tough. And we have taken a lot of evidence on this, and I think it's clear that it is. Of course, in the very long run, digital returns will be the future. The question is how we get there. This is a generational change. It's important not to sour relations between small businesses and the revenue. That can easily be done if you hit them over the head in the hope of getting a bit of extra money in year 1 and 2, or year 2 and 3. When just with a little more caution, they can be brought into the system, actually yielding a higher long-term revenue because you'll have their cooperation. A second change, and I won't linger too long on this one since I've lingered on making tax digital quite a bit, is of course on business rates. What he's announced is very welcome relief for those businesses hit by the revaluation. He's announced 3 concessions. They cost quite a bit of money taken collectively. I think they're not only important, they're essential changes. These small businesses who are being hit by this are the lifeblood of the local economy in all our constituencies, and the measures will certainly give them some relief from the pressure they were under. The Red Book suggests that he might consider proposals to encourage or to find a way of getting to more frequent revaluations of business rates. I'm pleased about that because the big problem that's been caused here is the cliff edge created by revaluations every 5 or 7 years. In a nutshell, what's required is more frequent revaluation and quicker appeals, both of them. And I just don't think it can be beyond the wit of man to devise a reform that can deliver both. While I'm thanking the Chancellor, I'd also like to thank him for agreeing, as he did when he came before the committee recently, to publish the distributional analysis of the budget measures, and on a basis comparable to that published in the last Parliament. The committee will be looking at the distributional analysis and other tax measures very carefully, and then in a slightly more considered way than we have in the past, less of a rush. And this will enable us to look very carefully at the distributional analysis. I will give way a third time.
In the spirit of thanking the Chancellor, would you join me in thanking the Chancellor for looking at wanting to consult on page 35 of the Red Book on introducing a new duty band for still cider just below 7.5% to target white ciders, which many of us across the House will know is particularly damaging on young people and homeless people. And this is a great signal of intent that we will get to grips and make sure that we don't have on our high streets, particularly off licences, this harmful, damaging and too cheap white cider.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has made his point, and he may well be right. I never talk for long on cider in the House of Commons. I always found it results in a very great deal of correspondence, whatever you say about it. So I think I'll avoid cider altogether. I just want to end with a couple of larger points about the backdrop to the budget. I want to discuss just 2 big risks that the Chancellor's having to deal with. First among these, and by far the biggest risk, is the economic prosperity to our constituents and to the stability of the West of a resurgence of economic nationalism. There's a bit of it in Britain, and there's a great deal more of it elsewhere in the world. Protectionism has been on the rise for some time, and it's already affecting global growth. It's worth bearing in mind that global growth has been anemic over the last 5 years, compared to the average of the last 30, and that includes the effects of the financial crash. A big difference in those 2 numbers. And global trade growth has been even weaker. Global trade is now declining as a share of world economic activity, and we should all be concerned about that. The link between prosperity and trade, though, doesn't seem to have registered with President Trump, at least not yet. He's withdrawn from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. TTIP looks to be in trouble. He's called the WTO a disaster, and he's threatening to withdraw from that too. But not the Prime Minister. She's made clear, as she put it, that Britain should be the firmest advocate for free trade anywhere in the world. She's right. If this were all to go wrong, if we were to return to full-blooded protectionism, we wouldn't have to look into the crystal ball. We could read the book of the 1930s. I will just one last time, and I have one more point I want to make.
Was the honourable member as disappointed as I that the Chancellor didn't mention that real wages and asset values were reduced at a stroke by 15% through devaluation? And whilst that secures more exports in the short term, that will be offset by tariffs in the future. So how does he see the prospects for trade when we get hit over the head with tariffs from the single market?
I am going to end with a word or 2 on Brexit, and I'm not going to comment particularly on the exchange rate, except to say that the devaluation, of course, does make the country poorer, but devaluations can come and go, and we need to look at the effects that in the markets that put there by the markets to act as a shock absorber as a consequence of the Brexit decision in a much longer term framework than judging it as we are now, so soon after the event. I do think that Brexit poses the risk of a trade shock. If the Honourable Lady will forgive me, I'd rather make a bit more progress. In fact, I'd rather wind up, because I'm sure the Honourable Lady will be wanting to make her own speech in just a moment. There certainly will be a trade shock if we revert to WTO rules. So I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister's made it clear that she's working for what she calls a bold and ambitious deal with the EU. Deep engagement, political and economic, from outside the EU almost certainly commands a majority in the House and in the country. Cutting off Britain almost certainly does not. Hopefully, all parties in the negotiations grasp the importance of securing a deal, but wanting a comprehensive deal, and in what will amount to 18 months of negotiations, and getting one are not the same thing. Getting it will be a massive undertaking. Businesses know that. That's why many of them won't wait around to find out whether there's going to be a deal. They'll protect themselves. They'll start moving economic activity out before 2019, and the supply chains will start adjusting, and to the UK's detriment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's one further point I want to make. There is a straightforward way of safeguarding the UK from that risk, and the UK must ask for it in the negotiations. It almost certainly also requires only qualified majority voting, and it's available under Article 50 of the treaty. The UK should make clear now that after leaving the EU, that is, having repealed the 72 Act, the UK's first requirement is that a standstill on the implementation of the detailed terms of any deal should be put in place. That is a crucial ingredient in order to bring stability and certainty during the negotiations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when the Conservatives first came to power in 2010, there was a 10% budget deficit, ballooning public debt, and the second lowest growth in the G7. That all amounted to a massive challenge. Now the public finances are stronger, only after 6 years of hard work. But the two risks to which I've alluded, in my view, could amount to a cocktail scarcely less difficult to handle, particularly if mistakes are made. The Chancellor has told us that he's taken a cautious approach by steadily reducing borrowing. I strongly support him in that, and he has my strong support to persist, even if he hits the heavy weather.
Just before I bring in the last one, John, can I just say it will be 10 minutes after this next speech. Stuart Jose.
Can I say in many ways the Chancellor didn't disappoint us. We had the self-effacing jokes about spreadsheets. We had the spun lines about being stronger together. And then it went downhill. Barely a mention of Brexit. The most momentous challenge facing the UK. Barely a mention of Brexit. And more importantly, what this Chancellor would do in order to mitigate the damage which we expect. But before we get to that, I had hoped very much to welcome a concrete package of measures for the oil and gas sector, particularly for end-of-life fields. Instead, we've been offered an options paper. But one of my sharp-eyed assistants has told me that's exactly the same promise made in 2016. So maybe at some point the Chancellor will actually deliver the paper and take some concrete measures. Budgets, not at the moment. Budgets sometimes can be assessed more by what's omitted as to what's included. And I would have thought there would have been more reference to the city deals today, how important they are for the areas which are negotiating them. And while he, I'll give Win a moment. And while he did mention fairness in passing and indeed living standards, he didn't really dwell for very long, in fact, not at all, on the contrary analysis or the counter-analysis to his assertions, which is that child poverty will increase by 30% by 21-22, entirely explained by the direct impact of tax and benefit reforms. He spoke about an increase to the minimum wage, which of course is welcome, but ignored the assessment which says real average earnings are forecast to rise less than 5% between now and 2021. In essence, more than a decade without real earnings growth, and I'll happily give way.
On the subject of emissions from the Chancellor's statement, the honourable gentleman knows that hundreds of people, hundreds of women have travelled to Westminster today from Scotland, from Greater Manchester, from all over the country to campaign against the unfairness of them not being properly informed about changes to their state pension. Would he agree with me that it is disrespectful, to say the very least, on International Women's Day, that those women fighting for justice on their pension got no mention at all from the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
And the final omission today is any redress for the WASPy women. That's absolutely correct. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's not at the moment. It's worth reminding ourselves how we got to where we are today. Not all this Chancellor's fault, but that the Tory targets on debt, deficit and borrowing promised in 2010 simply were not met. Just to demonstrate the scale of this failure, we were told debt would begin to fall as a share of GDP in 14-15. The current account would be in balance the following year. Public sector net borrowing would be barely £20 billion that year. Now, of course, as many of us warned at the time, that would not and did not happen. Debt will not begin to fall as a share of GDP until 18-19. The current account will not be in the black until the same year. And public sector net borrowing wasn't the barely £20 billion promised in 15-16, it was £72 billion. Now, in short, we would argue the first 5 years of Tory austerity failed, and with little confidence the second 5 years will be any better. But to the present and for the future, last autumn the Chancellor told us net debt would peak at 90% of GDP, £1.83 trillion. That's 12 zeros. Today he gave us the startling news, the huge progress. It will now peak at £1.83 trillion. Borrowing is down a few hundred million for 17-18, and the current budget, due to be in surplus by £18.5 billion in 1920, is barely changed. The forecasts are as bad as they were promised in the autumn and barely changed from last spring. And what growth there is seems to be driven in large measure by an assessment of increased business investment around 4% over the next few years. But the OBR tell us, they say forecasts, the OBR tell us there will be a 0.1% fall in business investment in 2017 before uncertainty begins to dissipate. Before uncertainty begins to dissipate. We're about to have Article 50 invoked, a tortuous 18-month to 2-year negotiation. And the OBR and the Treasury are telling us the uncertainty will dissipate sometime at the back end of this year. That almost beggars belief, and I'll happily give way.
Very grateful to him. Can he explain why he and his party thought before and immediately after the referendum there would be a sharp slowdown or recession this winter? Weren't they completely wrong then, and aren't they wrong now about Article 50?
Well, the right honourable gentleman is completely wrong. I can say with absolute certainty there was never ever a threat of an immediate collapse. Indeed, I am on record saying there will be no problem in week 1, month 1, year 1, even year 2 or year 3. That gets to us just beyond the negotiation. The danger was always the long-term risk to FDI being decreased, to trade being decreased, to the loss of GDP from reduced migration, which I'll come to because the Chancellor didn't. Now, much of this previous failure came because the last Tory government strangled the lifeblood from recovery by cutting too much or too quickly, with no or little regard to the consequences. That was an error set in stone with the old fiscal charter and the requirement to run a permanent surplus quickly, almost irrespective of the economic conditions. Now, the new fiscal charter, which wasn't really given a look in today, is certainly more flexible than the last one, but it still targets a surplus early in the next Parliament. I have to say the numbers and the timescale look precarious. The forecasts for a current account surplus are tiny, not even reaching 1.5% of GDP in this Parliament. If there is any external shock, if there is any capital flight, if we suffer more devaluation, quite likely, if the negotiations go badly, these figures could fall apart and fall apart very quickly indeed. And these numbers, Mr Deputy Speaker, are being delivered before the full impact of a hard Tory Brexit are felt. And we cannot even assess properly what the consequence of that is, because the OBR tell us, and I'm quoting, there's no meaningful basis for predicting the precise endpoint of the negotiations as a basis for our forecast. This is a central assumption pretending Brexit doesn't exist. Quite a ridiculous thing to do with the Article 50 invocation looming. However, the central forecast from the OBR is in rather stark contrast to what we already know. The Treasury have reported previously the UK could lose up to £66 billion from a hard Brexit. The GDP could fall by almost 10% if the UK reverted to WTO rules, the point made by the chair of the Select Committee. And other assessments mirror this. The LSE say in the long run, reduced trade lowers productivity, a huge problem for the UK, that increases the cost of Brexit to a loss of between 6.5% and 9.5% of GDP. And they put a range of figures on that of between £4,500 and £6,500 per household. Last year's PwC report suggests that employment could fall by 600,000. The figures for Scotland, produced by the Fraser-Valdner Institute, suggest a hard Tory Brexit could result in 80,000 lost Scottish jobs and a drop in wages averaging £2,000 in a decade. And if we add to that the report from the FTSE 500 senior executives saying Brexit is already having a negative impact on the business, or the British Chamber's reporting half the businesses surveyed have already seen a hit to margins due to devaluation, then we can actually see the scale of the problem, and that's what we should have seen today, was mitigation to match that. Now, to be fair to the Chancellor, he did move a little last autumn with announcements of additional support for capital investment and R&D, and he reiterated some of the R&D statements and put some flesh on the bone on other investment today, no doubt taking his cue from the IMF, who said previously enough had been done to stabilise the finances for it to embark on extra investment spending. But the figures from last year's autumn statement actually show public sector net investment falling in 17-18 to 18-19 and not recovering again until we get into the next Parliament. And the figures today for public sector gross investment actually show them falling this coming year, 17-18, to the forecast made only 3.5 months ago. The money should be spent now to mitigate, and not waiting until the OBR tell him the damage has been done. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's not all about broken promises on debt, deficit and borrowing. It's not even about repeating the mistakes of the past on investment. We're now in such uncertain times that trade, to protect jobs and the current account, should be front and centre. But there was little said about that today. The Red Book tells us already that the current account is in negative territory for the entire forecast period. The impact of net trade will be a zero or a drag on GDP growth for almost every year in the forecast period. And this is after an average 15%, devaluation in sterling since the EU referendum. So what? Yes, of course I'll change it.
Is he aware that the Red Book also points out that over the forecast period, the cumulative current account deficit is over 13% of GDP? We're going to have to sell an awful lot of UK companies to fund that.
It's precisely the point. The choices are we grow and we take exports seriously, or we do what Tory governments have always done and sell off the family silver for some foreign currency. So what growth there is, as I say, forecast to be based on heroic levels of business investment after the uncertainty of Brexit ends this year, or household consumption with a commensurate rise in household indebtedness, central government investment, which I welcome, and fixed investment in private dwellings, but where house prices are forecast to rise at 2 or 3 times the rise of inflation. Now, the budget report seems to make merit of this. People will feel wealthy. We know what happens when the prices fall, and we know the impact of this for youngsters trying to get on to the property ladder. And on household debt in particular, I'd have thought the Chancellor should have been much more alert to concerns that even after excluding mortgage payments, household debt has now reached record levels. This is not a balanced recovery. But it is, as I've said, the issue of trade which is most worrying. The figures are clear. The last full year, we've got the figures for 2015, show a current account deficit 80 billion in the red. A deficit in the trade in goods, £120 billion in the red. But at least he didn't repeat the claims of his predecessor that we could double exports by the end of this decade to £1 trillion. Although perhaps he should tell his right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for International Trade, who still apparently thinks it's sensible to keep the target, even though he doesn't believe it can be met. Now, this is not all the fault of this Chancellor. Many of these failings have been embedded in the UK economy for decades. And it's not just about exports, it's about support for innovation, which I do welcome, and for manufacturing, as well as boosting productivity across the board. We should have had, though, specific plans today. He's had enough time in office for substantial GDP growth, not the less than 2% in every year for the forecast period, lower than pre-crisis trend. We should have seen measures to boost productivity in the way we've done in Scotland, 4% higher than the 2007 level compared to next to nothing in the UK. Targeted support for high-growth, export-focused SMEs, taking more businesses out of business rates in England entirely, not just a bit more help for a short period of time. Now, I welcome what he said about education, because if they tackle the attainment gap, we can get inclusive growth. But we won't get inclusive growth if people are struggling to put food on the table because the welfare cap is squeezing down people's real incomes. And I will give way, of course.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, and earlier he was talking about significant emissions, and I wonder if he shares my deep concern about another emission. Nothing in this statement at all about the climate crisis, nothing about investing in green energy, energy efficiency, reversing the solar tax hike, nothing about public health emergency caused by air pollution. Does he agree that that is a reckless and irresponsible squandering of a vital opportunity?
I think the pattern we've seen over the last few years would confirm that. Not just the cuts to photovoltaic, the contract for difference changes, which were not helpful, all of the other matters which the Honourable Lady has made, and she's right to keep on making those points. However, one of the reasons the government can't fund its policies is because of the issue with tax yield. And I know, I believe in tax competition, but we look at the corporation tax yield. It flatlines, it falls, and it definitely falls in real terms for the last 4 years of the forecast period. So in order to make amends today, or to make the numbers stack up, we've seen a scandalous attack on aspiration, on the self-employed, taxing them more, changes to NICs, 4.2 billion or so from people. The party of aspiration, taxing those self-employed, putting in active, real hard disincentives to starting businesses, to employing people, to stepping out on one's own. I think that is a decision which will come back to haunt this Chancellor. I'll give way one more time.
Thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, but would he not agree that if a person works, they should be taxed equally, and there is a non-level playing field between the taxation on people who are employed and who are self-employed? Does he think that that is either fair or sustainable?
This is the problem with Tories. They talk about business as if they know it, assuming every businessman is a multi-billionaire. Most self-employed business people, when they start, earn less than the minimum wage. It's their businesses. And if they can take 1,000 or 2,000 out in a dividend to help them make ends meet at the end of the year, that's the right thing for them to be able to do. And if they become half a Microsoft in the future, they pay taxes, they employ tens of thousands of people, we all get to benefit. But none of these people will now do this automatically. They'll take in the second look, they'll have a pause, they'll wonder if the risk is worth it because of the disincentive put in place today. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to make a little progress. The Chancellor also announced some £350 million for Scotland. I thought I'd want to welcome that. The problem is it's rather smoke and mirrors. Even after today's announcement, Scotland's discretionary spending will still be down £1 billion between this year, 16-17, and the end of this Parliament, and over £2.5 billion, 9% down, in the Tory decade since 2010. So every little helps, but I don't think we'll be putting out the bunting to celebrate the Chancellor's largesse. The key point, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, I wish to make is about Brexit. A hard Tory Brexit, the elephant in the room, barely mentioned by the Chancellor, is approaching quickly. It means we do revert to WTO rules with all of the tariffs and other regulatory barriers if a better deal cannot be struck, and I have no confidence at all in the ability of this government to deliver that deal. There's no guarantee, not at the moment, there's no guarantee a deal will be done, and if the Chancellor expects the plans today can cope with the consequence of a cliff-edge Brexit, which the Prime Minister plans, then the whole government are in for a very rude awakening. Let's look at some facts. The economic value of EU citizens working in the UK is enormous. Indeed, PwC told us last year the impact of restrictions on migration alone, due to Brexit, could lead to a loss of over 1% of GDP. That's a 1% fall in GDP due to restrictions on migration alone. That will more than half the government's GDP growth forecasts for every single year in this forecast period, rendering them meaningless. And just to put some colour into that, my honourable friend from Dundee West met with the computer games industry today. 98.4% of the companies that responded to them said the government should guarantee the status of EU nationals working in the UK and do it immediately. So it would be, if not a fiscal measure, an active and positive economic one for the Chancellor to have done that today. It would have been an active and positive economic measure to guarantee the UK would fully replace lost EU funding but post-2020, specifically the Less Favoured Area Support Scheme, and particularly if the UK leaves the EU before the closure window in 2019. It would have been a positive economic measure today to confirm the UK's intention to negotiate substantial and long transitional arrangements for the financial sector to avoid the loss of jobs, of income, of headquarters and of tax. One final time.
I thank my honourable friend given way. Is he concerned, like me, about the announcement just 6 days ago in the Irish press that since the Brexit vote, over 100,000 UK companies have registered or taken steps to register offices in Ireland?
I'm not shocked by it. I'm not surprised by it. I think the thing we need to do is make sure, certainly in Scotland and in the UK, if the government can find the will to do it, that we make this as an attractive place as possible to continue to invest and run businesses. And for us, that means staying in the single market and, frankly, staying in the EU. However, the final thing I want to say was in reference to announcements made, not today, but in relation to the budget in the last week. There was the decision to have extra departmental spending cuts and the decision on PIP and other welfare measures. The latter, we believe, demonstrates the real impact of the welfare cap in punishing the most vulnerable and balancing the books on the back of the poor, confirming many predictions the UK is heading to become more equal than any time since the days of Margaret Thatcher, and the former confirming this government have learned nothing, tweaking the numbers to fit the ideology, being driven by an austerity agenda, failing to realise again you can't cut your way to growth. But at its heart, Mr Deputy Speaker, the real tragedy in this, only a week or so before Article 50 is invoked, is Brexit was the word that dare not speak its name, and this country is completely unprepared for the economic tsunami this government will unleash.
10-minute limit. John Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, I'd remind the House of my registration in the register of my business interest. The good news is in the forecasts, and I'm delighted that the government has now gone back to the forecast it put to us in March 2016, when it rightly said that the UK economy would grow by 2% in 2016 and would grow by a little over 2% in 2017. They were forecasts I could welcome then. They were forecasts I held to throughout the last year, and I'm delighted that the Treasury is largely back now with those more sensible forecasts. But I think we do need to ask, why did the Treasury and the OBR and the Bank of England and many other independent forecasters get the forecast so comprehensively wrong in the summer of 2016? And why were the autumn statement forecasts still so wrong very recently at the end of last year? And it does make me wonder whether we need some efficiency improvements in the economic forecasting departments. Do we really need all these forecasters we've got in OBR, Treasury and Bank of England if they're going to get it so comprehensively wrong and make the Chancellor's job so difficult trying to chart a consistent and stable course through a set of forecasts which are rather like a wild ride to some kind of nightmare world, only to discover there is no nightmare but a rather good outlook? I give way.
Go for it. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman says that if forecasters in the OBR and the Bank of England and the Treasury got the forecasts wrong, they ought to be got rid of. Well, plenty of modellers and forecasters in the City of London got their forecasts wrong before the crash of 2008. I'm sure he doesn't believe that we should end the banking trade in the City of London.
I think the Honourable Lady didn't listen to what I said. I said, have we got too many of them? Because we don't need quite so many to get it wrong. I think we could be more economical with getting it wrong if that is what they persist in doing. And certainly the official forecasters did completely miss the banking crash of 2008-9, which some of us didn't miss. And then, of course, they got the results of the Brexit impact completely wrong. And the SNP is now redefining what they believed at the time of the Remain campaign, but I remember quite clearly that they supported a campaign which said in terms that those official forecasts were right, that confidence would be damaged and therefore consumer expenditure would fall, whereas it actually went up very strongly, and they said that investment would collapse, and investment did not collapse because the demand was there and companies need to meet it. I give way.
Just to remind the right honourable member, I thank him for giving way, but I clearly remember being on the Treasury Select Committee when we interviewed the Chancellor, and I clearly remember taking the Chancellor to account for his bogus forecasts, which were clearly over the top, clearly bound to turn people off, and clearly led to the wrong result happening on June the 23rd.
Hear, hear. I'm delighted that the honourable gentleman shared my scepticism. I just wish he said rather more at the time when we were fighting the referendum, but I don't remember him being on my side or making similarly helpful comments before people went to vote. I give way briefly.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. One of the difficulties I found when I was the construction minister is that the stats under ONS are often incomplete and only based on partial information. Would you agree with me that actually if we had forecasts that were more infrequent, we might get the numbers right more often?
Well, that may be worth looking at. I think we do need to look at the whole question of why the forecasts went so comprehensively wrong on this occasion. And I think we need to also probe further as to why they went so wrong in 2007-2008, when they disrupted the world economy in the West and they disrupted the Labour government very dramatically because there was absolutely no foresight about the consequences of the actions they were taking over the banking system, first allowing it to expand too fast and then collapsing it far too quickly with the awful consequences we know. But that brings me neatly on from the bad forecast, and I'm delighted that now I can fully support the government's latest forecasts because they are in line with where I've been throughout, and go on to the monetary situation. And I think there the government does need to recognise that there is a new move afoot, that we're probably going to see an interest rate rise in the United States of America next week. We may see 2 or 3 25 basis point rises over the course of this year, because they now recognise that their recovery is sufficiently advanced. There's quite a bit more inflation in the American system, and they need to start to normalise interest rates a little more. We may even hear from the European Central Bank tomorrow that they are no longer thinking of cutting rates further, because they are already negative, and they may need to be thinking in due course about tapering their rather generous quantitative easing programmes. So we're moving into a world where interest rates are tending upwards rather than going down or staying stable. And if we are too slow in responding to that mood, then I think we'll find undue pressure on the pound. I don't think it's anything to do with Brexit. I think it's to do with interest rate differentials. The pound started to fall away in the summer of 2015. Most of the devaluation we've seen to date actually took place by April of last year before the vote. But there has been more pressure in recent weeks when people look at these interest rate differentials and say, well, why don't I hold my money in dollars? Because I'm not only immediately getting a pickup in interest, but I think there will be further rate rises in America. So we need to factor that in, which is why I go on to welcome the government's decision to increase public spending in certain areas. And I, as a constituency MP, very much welcome and want to see more money spent on social care. I'm in a high-cost area of the country where the shoe was pinching and where there are more people needing that assistance, and I think the government is right to make a sensible contribution. I look forward to seeing the details. I think we're running out of time, so I can't take any more interventions. I welcome the decision to have some more money for schools and for the NHS, because there too, my area has been very poorly funded for many years. We're looking forward to getting a much better settlement under fairer funding for our schools, but I hope there'll be something for our schools as a result of this very sensible decision by the Chancellor to make some increases. And I think colleagues generally will welcome the government's attention to schools funding and to NHS funding and to social care. I also hope the rate relief fund will be generous, because I, again, have an area where there are likely to be substantial increases in the rates, but the businesses aren't necessarily generating the extra turnover that makes it easy to pay those sharp increases. We need to look after our small and growing businesses in particular, and I hope the fund will be well targeted and will deal with what will otherwise be a series of hard cases. And I welcome that extra spending and that relief on tax because I'm not as worried as some are about the level of the UK debt. We need to remember that the figures that the government is giving us are the gross debt, and they're saying that the debt at 86% of GDP is high and needs to be brought down. But of course, quite a bit of that debt is owned by the Bank of England on our behalf, so we owe the money to ourselves. So the adjusted figure is actually around 65%, which I think is a perfectly reasonable level, particularly at a time of very low interest rates when we all think that whatever happens on advanced country monetary policies, they're going to remain abnormally low for quite a long period of time, well below the averages we were used to before the banking crash. So I don't think this is a bad time for the state to be borrowing, particularly if it's investing in projects that we need and may have some return. We definitely need better transport. We definitely need strengthened broadband. Much of that can be done by private finance. We definitely need better control of flooding and at the same time more water reserves for the fast-growing areas of the country. We need a lot of extra housing, and that brings with it the need for more provision for schools and for hospitals. And if we are going to carry on growing at something like the rate we've been growing in recent years, we have to accept there is now a backlog of infrastructure requirements, everything from roads through to water supply, through to getting our broadband up to speed and sufficient in capacity. I want as much of that as possible to be financed in the private sector, and a lot of it will and can be financed in the private sector. But the government does have a very important role in all of these areas. It has to offer licences, it has to organise the planning permissions, it may need to pump prime, there may be some parts of the networks which are not going to be financially viable without government money. And that is certainly true of our road system, because we have a free at the point of use system in the UK owned by the state in all its manifestations. And so because we need better roads, there clearly needs to be a decent amount of investment in roads by Her Majesty's government. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I note that the budget on the tax side was mercifully short of measures, although I'm always in favour, of course, of measures that cut taxes rather than increase them, and I would have welcomed rather more of those, because I think the Chancellor understandably wishes to go on to one budget a year, and the budget will be in the autumn. So I think we look forward to a budget that deals with taxation in the autumn, and he has set out a number of ideas for consultation or perhaps pre-announcement, where I trust there might be some modification by the time we get to the proper budget in the autumn. Because I would urge my right honourable friend to understand just how crucial the flexibility is in our economy that comes from so much and a growing volume of self-employment, and we need to make sure that it is as easy as possible to get into self-employment, and then it is as worthwhile as possible when people are successful. I always think it's a good idea to try and confine taxes, certainly tax rises, to taxing things that you don't approve of very much. We have quite a number of sin taxes, and they are rather easier to sell to the public. I don't think we should be going out of our way to tax work and enterprise and success. I know you have to do some of it because you need a lot of revenue for the range of public services we offer, but I think our taxes on those things are quite high enough, and we might actually find that we raise more revenue from more work and from more enterprise if the rates are actually lower, because there is definitely a beneficial effect if you can get your rates to a competitive level worldwide. We need to understand, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that other countries around the world are getting the idea of cutting their tax rates, and the new President of the United States of America is working with Republicans on the Hill at the moment over a very major set of tax proposals which could cut American corporate tax rates and American income tax rates very dramatically, which would give America a very important competitive advantage and make America a much more attractive place for talent and inward investment. And we need to bear that in mind as we go into our autumn budget cycle here, because I do want the UK to be the most competitive major economy in the world. And my last point in response to the previous speaker from the SNP is that he should not start painting this picture of misery and collapse for 3 years' time now, given that there was no collapse immediately after the result of the vote. Were we to end up on World Trade Organization terms, we would collect 12 billion of tariff revenue, which we could give back to businesses and consumers here. They would only collect 5 billion of tariff revenue on our exports to them. So we would be better off financially on that transaction. We would also be better off because we would presumably substitute a lot of imported food from cheaper parts of the world if large tariffs had been placed by them on their food exports to us, which would be an extraordinary type of self-harm.
Mitchell Reeves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor spoke today about his determination to tackle the dangers lurking in the small print of contracts. So let's, Mr. Deputy Speaker, look at the small print of the Chancellor's own budget today. Inflation up, wages stagnating, household debt rising, and an NHS and social care system on its knees. Social care has been cut in the last 5 years by £4.6 billion, with £2 billion being announced today. It's not enough to deal with an ageing population and the huge cuts faced by local authorities. And not even in the small print of the budget today was the issue of Europe. Not a single mention by the Chancellor of the European Union or the negotiations which we presume will begin at the end of this month. And there is increasing concern that a Tory hard Brexit, falling back on WTO rules and tariffs, will harm our exports and inward investment further. And yet nothing today to assure businesses and investors that we will have a system that will work for them in the years ahead. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, today is International Women's Day, but there is very little in the budget today that does anything at all to help women. It is women who have borne 86% of the cuts and the benefit cuts and the tax rises and the cuts to in-work benefits over the last few years. £80 billion a year being taken out of the pockets of women in the last 7 years under this Tory-led government, and yet the budget today does nothing to reverse that trend. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to household debt, the figures are startling.
the whole forecast is dependent on consumers continuing to spend.
Yep.
But that consumption is based on consumers continuing to rack up the debts.
Exactly.
Our savings ratio has been falling since 2010 and is now at a record low. Unsecured debt, I will in a moment, unsecured debt up 10% last year. The household debt-to-income ratio now at 145%, up 6% in just 1 year. I will give way.
Isn't it a good thing if a young person with a reasonable job takes out a mortgage? Isn't that sensible to borrow?
Well, unsecured debt, as the right honourable gentleman knows, also grew by 10% last year. That's not secured against anything solid at all. And the household income ratio, back close to levels that we were experiencing in 2008, I think should sow in all of our minds seeds of doubt about the sustainability of our economy. I am concerned about the ability of consumers to carry on bearing this burden. They will either have to do it by increasing their debts or by real wage increases. And yet, in the budget today, we saw real wage growth contract sharply because of the sharp increase in inflation that we're seeing as a result of the depreciation of our currency. This is not, Mr Deputy Speaker, an economy well placed to withstand the strains and the shocks that lie ahead. And my argument today is that this dangerous reliance on borrowing and debt is directly connected to the government's failure. A failure to put wealth and opportunity in the hands of the many rather than just the few. Yeah. And whilst the front bench on the other side keeps saying that they are on the side of ordinary people, they have not shown this with their actions at all today. Last week, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Institute for Fiscal Studies reported that we are now on course for a rapid rise in inequality over the next 5 years. The bottom 10% of the earnings distribution, those who already have the least, will see their incomes fall, particularly due to universal credit in the next few years. Meanwhile, those with the most, the top 10%, will see their take-home pay increase by 10%. And this is a direct consequence of the government's failure to reverse our economy's growing reliance on low-paid work and low productivity, with 1 in 5 people now paid less than the living wage, as well as the deep cuts to in-work benefits, which make it harder for those families in work to make ends meet. Mr Deputy Speaker, this cannot be right. But that's not it. The government has now ignored 2 independent court rulings, which will save them £3.7 billion by cutting access to disability benefits for over 160,000 people. There is no mention at all of this in the budget today. And switching people from the disability living allowance to personal independence payments has seen nearly 50,000 people lose their Motability cards because their benefits have been cut under these blatantly unfair changes to the assessment rules. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is not the sort of country I want to live in, and I don't think it's the sort of country our constituents want to live in either. No. It is not only a betrayal of the hard-working majority that this government promised to put first, but it's a callous disregard for the poorest and the most vulnerable in all of our communities. And it is not the way to build a better balanced and more broad-based economy that we need to build for the more turbulent times we are bound to see ahead. So let me just give a few areas where I think that the decisions today have been misjudged and how the government could have delivered a fairer budget. First of all, the government are going ahead with a £1 billion cut to inheritance tax for the richest people in our country. This money should instead be spent on expanding free childcare for families, particularly those on the lowest incomes. Almost half of this inheritance tax giveaway will go to London and the South East. In fact, 96 of the top 100 constituencies that benefit from this are in London and the South East. Well, what about our constituencies in the north of England, in Scotland, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, in all the rest of the UK, which doesn't benefit 1 penny from these cuts in inheritance tax? I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful for the Honourable Member giving way. I think what she said was that it was important to spend more money on childcare. Did the Honourable Member hear when the Chancellor delivered his speech that this government spends £6 billion a year on childcare?
The Honourable Lady will also know that the manifesto promise that her government were elected on has been delayed time and time again. And if the Honourable Lady really thinks that the support that is going to, we hope, come forward in September is enough to help women and families get back to work and deliver the high-quality childcare for all children that we need, I'm afraid that she is deluded. Cutting inheritance tax is unfair, it's misguided, and it is a blatantly unfair policy that is further evidence of this government's warped sense of priorities at a time when we should be doing far more to help the millions of families struggling with childcare costs. Mr Deputy Speaker, just 1 in 2,500 people in England and Wales will benefit from this cut in inheritance tax, which will lift 26,000 of the richest families out of inheritance tax.